A mountain man crashes into town with 48 hours to find a wife, or lose the daughter he never knew existed. What happens when a man who spent 7 years running from his past discovers he's a father? When the law says an orphaned child needs a proper home, and time is measured in snowflakes before the first blizzard hits. This is the story of 3 broken people who became a family nobody thought could survive. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The bell above the general store door didn't so much ring as scream when Cole Mercer kicked it open. Every head in Black Hollow Ridge turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Martha Henderson's knitting needles stopped clicking. Even old Thomas Pike, who'd seen Apache raids and survived 2 winters eating nothing but pine bark, took an unconscious step backward. Cole Mercer didn't visit town. The mountain man stood in the doorway like something carved from the granite cliffs themselves. 6'3" of weathered leather, scar tissue, and silence. Snow melted off his bearskin coat onto the warped floorboards. His hands, massive and calloused from years of splitting wood and skinning elk, trembled against his sides. Nobody in Black Hollow Ridge had seen Cole Mercer afraid before. "I need to speak with Miss Hart." His voice came out rough, like he'd forgotten how to use it properly. "Now!" Evelyn Hart looked up from the ledger she'd been pretending to balance for the past 20 minutes. Her fingers tightened around the pencil until her knuckles went white. She'd been in Black Hollow Ridge for 8 months, working behind the counter of Jameson's general store, keeping her head down and her past buried 300 miles east. She knew everyone in town whispered about the mountain man, the ghost who lived in a cabin nobody could find, the hunter who left fresh meat on widows' porches during harsh winters but never stayed for thanks, the man with scars across his back that looked like cave-in marks from the old mining disaster 7 years ago, the one that killed 16 men and left the survivors wishing they'd died too. "Store's about to close," Evelyn said quietly. Her Missouri accent had mostly faded, but stress brought it back around the edges. "You'll need to make it quick." Cole removed his hat. His hair was dark, streaked with premature gray at the temples, tied back with a leather cord. His face might have been handsome once, before something had carved the humanity out of it and left behind only survival. "Not here." He glanced at the townsfolk, pretending not to stare. "Outside." Martha Henderson made a small noise of protest. "Now see here." "It's all right, Mrs. Henderson." Evelyn untied her apron with steady hands that betrayed none of the panic rising in her chest. She'd spent 8 months invisible. 8 months safe. Whatever this was, it threatened to change that. She followed Cole onto the covered porch. The November sky pressed down gray and heavy with coming snow. In the mountains behind town, the peaks had already disappeared into white. Cole turned to face her, and Evelyn realized with a start that his eyes were wet. "I need a wife," he said. "By tomorrow." The words hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn's first instinct was to laugh. Surely this was some kind of frontier joke she didn't understand. But Cole Mercer's expression held no humor, only desperation so raw it was uncomfortable to witness. "Excuse me? There's a child." His voice cracked. "A little girl, 7 years old. She's arriving on tomorrow's train from Kansas City, and if I don't have a wife, a proper home, the territorial judge will send her to an orphanage in Denver." Evelyn's throat went dry. "I don't understand." Cole's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, like he was physically fighting to get the words out. 7 years ago, I worked the mines outside of Deadwood. There was a woman, Sarah. I loved her. The past tense landed like a stone. Then the mine collapsed. He touched his shoulder unconsciously, where Evelyn could see the edge of an old scar disappearing beneath his collar. 16 men died. I should have been number 17, spent 4 months in a hospital bed, and when I could finally move again, I ran. You left her. I convinced myself she'd be better off. His laugh was bitter. Told myself I was too broken, too damaged, that she deserved someone whole. Evelyn understood that logic more than she wanted to admit. I never went back, never wrote, just disappeared into these mountains and tried to forget I'd ever been human. Cole's jaw tightened. Last week I got a letter from a lawyer in Kansas City. Sarah died 6 months ago, fever, and the daughter I never knew existed is being sent to her father, me, because there's nobody else. The world seemed to tilt slightly. You have a daughter, Her name is Clara. When he said it, something in his face changed, softened, and shattered at the same time. The lawyer included a photograph. She has Sarah's eyes. And the judge? Arrives on the same train to inspect my living situation. Cole's voice turned hard again, defensive. Apparently a 7-year-old girl can't live alone in the mountains with a man who barely speaks and doesn't own a proper cooking pot. Needs a mother, a family, a real home. So you thought, I'm not asking you to actually be my wife. The words came out fast, rehearsed, like he'd been practicing them all the way down the mountain. Just pretend. For the inspection. I'll pay you, everything I have. There's $300 buried under my cabin floor, 7 years of hunting money I never spent. It's yours, all of it. Just help me keep my daughter. $300. Evelyn's breath caught. That was enough to disappear again if she needed to. Enough to start over somewhere the past couldn't find her. Why me? Cole met her eyes directly for the first time. Because you're the only woman in this town who looks like she's running from something too. And people who are running, they understand desperation. The observation was too accurate, too close. Evelyn felt her carefully constructed walls crack. I can't. The words came out automatically, defensive. I'm sorry, but I can't. She turned to go back inside, but Cole's voice stopped her. Her favorite color is yellow. His voice was quiet now, almost broken. That's what the lawyer said. Sarah taught her to read before she died. Clara knows all her letters and can write her own name. She's afraid of thunderstorms but loves the rain. And her mother's last words were telling her that somewhere out there she has a father who would love her if he only knew she existed. Evelyn's hand froze on the door handle. I know I don't deserve this chance, Cole continued. I know I'm 7 years too late, but that little girl already lost her mother. If I can't give her a home tomorrow, she loses everything else too. And I can't let that happen. Not again. The ache in his voice was unbearable. Evelyn thought about the little girl arriving on tomorrow's train, alone, scared, mourning her mother, being delivered to a father who was a stranger. She thought about orphanages and the particular kind of loneliness that came from having nowhere to belong. She thought about another little girl, 3 years ago, who had needed someone to speak up for her, someone to be brave when it mattered, and how Evelyn had stayed silent instead. What time does the train arrive? She heard herself ask. Cole's expression shifted, hope and disbelief colliding. 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And the judge? Will inspect my home the morning after, then make his ruling. Evelyn turned around slowly. You said you have a cabin. In the mountains, about 2 hours' ride from here. Does it have a separate bedroom? Cole nodded quickly. I've been building one, for Clara. It's not finished, but you'll finish it tonight. Evelyn's voice was steadier now, falling into the practical rhythm of problem-solving. And tomorrow morning, before the train arrives, you'll come back to town with your wagon. Bring anything that looks like you own dishes. Real plates, not tin. Curtains, if you have them. If not, buy fabric from Mrs. Henderson. I don't understand. If we're going to convince a territorial judge that you can provide a proper home for a child, then you need to actually have a proper home. She crossed her arms, her mind already making lists. I'll need to see it before the inspection. Fix whatever needs fixing. Cole stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You're saying yes? I'm saying I'll help you not lose your daughter. Evelyn held up one finger. But I have conditions. Anything. First, I keep my job at the store. I'm not giving up my independence. Of course. Second, this is temporary. Once the judge approves your situation, we figure out a way to quietly end this arrangement without it looking suspicious. Agreed. Third, she paused, making sure he understood the weight of what she was about to say. You don't touch me. You don't come into my room uninvited. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I'm doing this for Clara, not for you. Something flickered across Cole's face. Hurt, maybe, or shame, but he nodded. You have my word. And fourth, Evelyn's voice dropped. You never ask about my past. Ever. I help you with yours. You leave mine buried. Do we understand each other? Cole studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. We understand each other. Then we have a deal. Evelyn extended her hand like she was sealing a business transaction, because that's exactly what this was. Cole's hand engulfed hers, rough, warm, impossibly large. His grip was gentle despite his size. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know you don't owe me anything, but thank you." Evelyn pulled her hand back quickly. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to actually pull this off." She turned and walked back into the general store, leaving Cole standing alone on the porch. Inside, Martha Henderson and Thomas Pike immediately pretended to be fascinated by the canned goods display. "I'll need the day off tomorrow, Mr. Jameson," Evelyn announced to the store owner. "Personal business." Harold Jameson looked up from his newspaper with raised eyebrows. In 8 months, Evelyn had never taken a single day off. "Everything all right, Miss Hart?" "Everything's fine." She untied her apron again, this time for real. "I'll be back the day after." She didn't offer any additional explanation. Didn't acknowledge the curious stares following her across the store. Just collected her coat and hat and walked out the back door into the alley. The first snowflakes were starting to fall. Evelyn stood in the narrow space between buildings, breathing hard, trying to process what she'd just agreed to. Marry a stranger, pretend to be a mother, lie to a territorial judge, all to save a little girl she'd never met. It was insane. It was also the first time in 3 years that she'd felt anything other than numb. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that dissolved the moment they touched the ground. By tomorrow, they'd stick. By the day after, the mountain passes would be dangerous. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward her boarding house. She had a lot to prepare before morning. Behind her, she didn't see Cole Mercer still standing on the general store porch, holding his hat in both hands, looking at the mountains like a man about to walk into battle. The boarding house where Evelyn rented a room sat at the edge of town, a narrow 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left and smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and wood smoke. Mrs. Chen, the elderly widow who owned it, asked no questions as long as rent arrived on time. Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room, a space barely large enough for a bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing everything she owned. She lit the oil lamp and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the basin. 26 years old. Brown hair she kept pinned back severely. Brown eyes that had learned not to meet anyone's gaze directly. A face people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. That had been intentional. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the photograph she kept hidden there, the only thing she'd brought with her from Missouri. A schoolhouse. 15 children arranged in rows, and in the front, a little girl with blonde braids and a gap-toothed smile. Rachel Morrison, age 8, dead 3 years. Evelyn's hands started shaking. She quickly tucked the photograph back under the pillow, out of sight, but never out of mind. "You can't save her," she whispered to the empty room. "Rachel's gone. This won't change that." But Clara wasn't gone. Clara was arriving on tomorrow's train, and maybe, this time Evelyn could be brave enough to actually help. She stood abruptly and opened her trunk, sorting through her limited wardrobe. She'd need something appropriate for a wedding. The thought was absurd. She was getting married tomorrow to a man she'd spoken to for 10 minutes total. A marriage that wasn't real, except it would have to look real. Sound real. Feel real enough to convince a judge. Evelyn pulled out her only good dress, dark blue wool, high-necked, practical. It would have to do. She laid it carefully across the bed, then began making mental lists of everything else she'd need. A wedding required a minister. In Black Hollow Ridge, that meant Reverend Walsh, a kind man who asked uncomfortable questions about faith and redemption. He'd want to know why the sudden urgency. She'd have to lie convincingly. She was getting good at lying. The door creaked open and Mrs. Chen appeared carrying a tray with tea and bread. The old woman rarely spoke, but she noticed everything. "You look troubled," Mrs. Chen observed in her accented English. "Just tired." Evelyn accepted the tray with a grateful nod. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen didn't leave. Instead, she studied Evelyn with the kind of perception that came from a long life watching people hide their truths. "The mountain man who came to the store today," she said carefully, "people are talking." Of course they were. In a town this small, Cole Mercer asking to speak privately with the quiet shop girl would be news by sunrise. "It's nothing," Evelyn said, "just business." "Dangerous business, maybe." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "I know the look of a woman preparing to do something foolish to run from her past." I wore that look once, very long ago. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'm not running. No. Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. You stopped running the moment you said yes to him. Now you are standing still, which is much more frightening. The old woman left before Evelyn could formulate a response. Alone again, Evelyn sipped the tea and stared at the dark blue dress. Mrs. Chen was right. For 3 years she'd been running, from Missouri, from guilt, from the memory of a little girl's death. She'd convinced herself that staying invisible, staying uninvolved, was the safest path. But safe had turned into numb. And numb had turned into a different kind of death. Tomorrow she would marry Cole Mercer. The day after, she would help convince a judge that a mountain recluse could provide a loving home. And then she didn't know. But for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn felt something like purpose stirring in her chest. She finished her tea, changed into her nightgown, and lay down in the narrow bed. Outside, the snow was falling steadily now. The mountains would be white by morning. Sleep didn't come easily. Cole rode back to his cabin in the dark, guided only by instinct and the dim glow of stars struggling through snow clouds. The trail up the mountain was treacherous even in daylight, a narrow path that wound through pine forests and along cliff edges where one wrong step meant a 100-foot drop onto rocks. His horse, a sturdy mare named Stella, knew the route better than he did. The cabin appeared after an hour of riding, a dark shape against darker trees, smoke rising from the chimney where he'd left the fire banked that morning. It wasn't much. Single room, built with his own hands from logs he'd cut and notched himself. A stone fireplace, a sleeping loft, a root cellar. And now, the beginnings of a second room. Cole dismounted and led Stella into the small lean-to stable he'd constructed against the cabin's north wall. He rubbed her down quickly, gave her oats and water, then stood in the snow staring at his home. A little girl was going to live here. His little girl. The reality of it kept hitting him in waves, disbelief and terror, and something that might have been joy if he remembered what joy felt like. He'd started building Clara's room the same day he received the lawyer's letter. Worked 18-hour days cutting and fitting boards, installing a window that faced east so she'd wake to sunlight, carving small animals into the bedposts because the letter mentioned she liked stories about forest creatures. He didn't know how to be a father. Hell, he barely knew how to be human anymore. 7 years in these mountains had stripped away everything except survival. He woke before dawn, hunted, chopped wood, preserved meat, fixed whatever broke, and spoke to no one. Sometimes weeks passed without him using his voice for anything except cursing at stubborn firewood, and now he was supposed to raise a child. Cole pushed open the cabin door and stood in the threshold, looking at the space with new eyes. Evelyn Hart's eyes. It was a disaster. The main room was functional but harsh. A rope bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 mismatched chairs, shelves holding ammunition and trapping supplies, pelts drying from ceiling beams. The floor was packed dirt covered partially with a bearskin rug. The walls were bare logs, no decoration except the rifle mounted above the fireplace, and the hunting knife collection that probably looked terrifying to anyone not accustomed to frontier life. This was not a home where a 7-year-old girl should live, but it was what he had. Cole lit the oil lamps and surveyed Clara's room. The walls were up, the roof was finished, the window was in place. But there was no door yet, just an open frame. The floor was still raw boards, unsanded. The bed he'd built was sturdy but plain. No mattress, no bedding, nothing soft. He had tonight to make it better. And he had no idea where to start. Cole stood in the unfinished room, feeling the weight of his own inadequacy. Then he forced himself to move. Paralysis wouldn't help Clara. Action might. He started with the bed. He'd been saving the good mattress ticking he'd bought last spring, had planned to make himself something better than the rope bed he'd been using. But Clara needed it more. He spent 2 hours stuffing it with the dried grass and wool he'd been collecting, stitching it closed with the same leather cord he used for snowshoes. The bedpost had his carvings, a deer, a rabbit, an owl, a fox. He'd worked on them at night by lamplight, telling himself it was just to keep his hands busy. But he'd carved them with a precision he usually reserved for making traps that couldn't fail. While his hands worked, his mind kept returning to the scene outside the general store. Evelyn Hart's face when she'd said yes, the conditions she'd laid out, the walls in her eyes that matched the walls around his own heart. You look like you're running from something too. He shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have looked at another person's pain and used it as leverage. But desperation made people cruel. Cole finished the mattress and moved on to sanding the floor. The repetitive scrape of the plane against wood was meditative. He worked until his shoulders burned and sawdust coated his arms. At midnight, he took a break and stood in the main room, breathing hard. The hunting knife collection had to go. He took them down and stored them in the cellar. The ammunition came off the shelves. The drying pelts disappeared into the lean-to stable. He even removed the rifle from above the fireplace, though that made him nervous. A gun within easy reach had been automatic survival for 7 years. But Clara didn't need to grow up seeing weapons first thing every morning. He worked through the night, built a door for her room using boards he'd been saving for winter repairs, crafted a simple shelf for books she didn't have yet, polished stones he'd collected from the creek and strung them on wire, hanging them near the window where they'd catch morning light and spin gently in the drafts. When dawn broke gray and cold through the windows, Cole stood back and looked at what he'd created. It still wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was honest. And maybe that mattered more than perfection. He washed his face in the basin, changed into his cleanest shirt, and saddled Stella again. The ride down to Black Hollow Ridge took longer in daylight because he pulled the wagon, the same one he used twice a year to haul supplies. Today it would carry his wife. The word felt foreign, wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. But if it meant keeping Clara, he'd wear whatever mask was necessary. Evelyn woke before dawn to the sound of the boarding house settling in the cold. She dressed carefully, the blue wool dress, her hair pinned back but softer than usual, the small gold locket that was the only jewelry she owned. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Today, she was getting married. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely calm. Numb, maybe. Or perhaps just resigned to the fact that her life had stopped making sense a long time ago, and this was simply another unexpected turn. She packed a small bag with a few changes of clothes, her nightgown, the photograph she kept under her pillow. Everything else stayed in the trunk. She wasn't moving permanently, just temporarily, until the judge's inspection was complete. That's what she told herself anyway. At 7 o'clock, she walked to the general store and found Harold Jameson already unlocking the front door. "Miss Hart." He looked surprised to see her. "I thought you needed the day." "I do. I just came to collect a few things." Evelyn pushed past him into the store and began gathering supplies. Fabric for curtains, lamp oil, coffee, sugar, dried beans, salt pork, small luxuries she suspected Cole Mercer's cabin had never seen. "Should I put this on your account?" Jameson asked, confused. "No, I'll pay cash." She counted out bills from her carefully saved wages. "Planning a trip?" "Something like that." She was carrying her purchases outside when she saw the wagon rolling up Main Street. Cole sat on the bench, looking profoundly uncomfortable in what appeared to be his attempt at town clothes: clean trousers, a dark vest, his hair still tied back but neater than yesterday. He pulled to a stop in front of the store. For a moment they just looked at each other, two people about to commit to an elaborate lie for the sake of a child neither of them had met. "Morning," Cole said finally. "Morning." He climbed down and took her bags, loading them into the wagon bed with surprising gentleness. Evelyn noticed he'd brought blankets to make the wooden bench more comfortable. "We need to see Reverend Walsh first," Evelyn said, "before the train arrives." Cole's jaw tightened. "About that. Unless you have a better plan for making this look legitimate?" "No, but—" He stopped, searching for words. "Walsh will ask questions about why so sudden, about whether if we've— Let me handle Reverend Walsh." Evelyn climbed onto the wagon bench without waiting for help. "You just agree with whatever I say." The Reverend's house sat behind the small church at the north end of town, a tidy cabin with real glass windows and a garden that would be beautiful in spring. Walsh answered the door in his shirt sleeves, surprised to find visitors so early. "Miss Hart, Mr. Mercer." His eyes widened slightly at seeing them together. "How can I help you?" "We'd like to get married," Evelyn said simply. "This morning, if possible." Walsh's expression cycled through confusion, concern, and something that might have been disapproval. He was a good man but traditional, the type who believed marriage was sacred and not to be rushed. "I see. And may I ask why the urgency?" My daughter arrives on today's train, Cole said quietly. From Kansas City. Her mother died, and I'm all she has left. The territorial judge is coming to inspect my home tomorrow, and his voice caught. I need to give her a proper family. It was the truth, or close enough. And the rawness in Cole's voice made it impossible to doubt his sincerity. Walsh's expression softened. A child who's lost her mother. How old? 7. The Reverend was quiet for a moment, studying both of them. Evelyn met his gaze steadily, willing him not to ask the question she could see forming behind his eyes. Finally, Walsh nodded. Come inside. We'll need witnesses, but I believe Mrs. Walsh's sister is visiting. She and my wife will serve. 20 minutes later, Evelyn Hart stood in Reverend Walsh's small parlor, surrounded by strangers, repeating vows she didn't mean to a man she didn't know. Do you, Cole Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then said, I do. There was no ring, no kiss, just Walsh's declaration that they were now husband and wife, and the scratch of his pen on the marriage certificate. Mrs. Walsh and her sister signed as witnesses. Walsh handed Evelyn the certificate with a warm but worried smile. May your home be blessed, he said, and may you find happiness together. Evelyn folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her bag. Happiness wasn't part of the agreement, but Clara deserved a home, and sometimes that was more important than happiness. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with the promise of more. Cole helped Evelyn back onto the wagon bench, his hands careful, impersonal, exactly as she'd demanded. We should head up to the cabin, he said. Get you settled before we come back for the train. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode out of Black Hollow Ridge in silence. Behind them she could see curtains twitching as the townspeople watched the mountain recluse leaving with his new bride. By tonight, everyone would be talking. By tomorrow, none of it would matter if they couldn't convince the judge. The wagon climbed into the mountains, following a trail that grew narrower and steeper with each mile. Evelyn gripped the seat as they navigated switchbacks with 100-foot drops on one side and sheer rock faces on the other. How do you do this in winter? She asked, breaking the silence. Carefully. Cole kept his eyes on the trail. Sometimes I can't. That's why I stock supplies in fall. And if there's an emergency, then I deal with it alone. The isolation of his life was becoming clearer. No wonder he rarely came to town. The journey alone took hours, and that was in good weather. Clara will need to go to school eventually, Evelyn said. She can't live up here year-round. Cole's hands tightened on the reins. I know. I've been trying to figure that out. We could board her in town during the school term. With Mrs. Chen, maybe. You've thought about this. Someone has to. Evelyn watched the mountains rising around them, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. You're good at survival, Mr. Mercer, but raising a child requires more than that. He was quiet for a long moment, then, It's Cole. You're my wife now, even if it's pretend. Might as well use my name. Cole, then. And for what it's worth, he glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the trail. You're right. About all of it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm terrified I'm going to fail her, but I'm grateful you're here to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. I suspect that will be often. The cabin appeared around a bend, small, weathered, clinging to the mountainside like it had grown there naturally. Smoke rose from the chimney, pine trees pressed close on 3 sides. The view east looked out over the valley where Black Hollow Ridge sat like a collection of toys in the distance. It was completely isolated and strangely beautiful. Cole brought the wagon to a stop and helped Evelyn down. She stood in the snow, looking at what would temporarily be her home, and felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not fear, possibility. Come on, Cole said quietly. Let me show you what I've built. He pushed open the cabin door, and Evelyn stepped inside. The transformation from what it must have been was obvious. She could see the cleaner rectangles on the walls where things had hung, the fresh sawdust around a newly installed door frame. Cole had tried. That much was clear. But what caught her breath was the small room to the left. Clara's room. Evelyn walked to the threshold and looked inside. The bed with its carved animals, the polished stones catching weak sunlight from the window, The rough shelf waiting for books. The floor still smelling of fresh-cut wood. Every surface showed evidence of desperate, fumbling love. "It's not much," Cole said behind her. His voice was defensive, uncertain. "But I tried to make it—" "It's perfect," Evelyn interrupted, and meant it. Because this room wasn't about luxury or comfort. It was about a man who had spent 7 years running from himself, suddenly building a home for a daughter he'd never met. It was about second chances. And standing there, looking at those carved bedposts, Evelyn Hart felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away since the day Rachel Morrison died. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, terrifying hope. "We need to add curtains," she heard herself say, "and bedding. And we should wash these windows before Clara arrives. First impressions matter." Cole stared at her like she'd just offered him salvation. "You'll help me?" Evelyn turned to face him. "That's why I'm here, isn't it?" They worked through the morning in practiced silence. Evelyn hung curtains she'd quickly sewn from the fabric purchased at the store. Cole washed windows until they sparkled. Together they made up Clara's bed with blankets that smelled of cedar and lavender. Slowly, impossibly, the harsh mountain cabin began to look like a home. At noon, they stopped to eat bread and cheese, standing awkwardly in the main room like strangers forced together by circumstance, which is exactly what they were. "We should talk about the judge," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "What he'll ask, how we'll answer." Cole nodded. "He'll want to know how we met, how long we've known each other." "We met at the general store 4 months ago," Evelyn said, creating their fiction on the fly. "You came in for supplies, we started talking. You courted me properly, visits to town, chaperoned walks, letters. Letters I can't produce if he asks. Then we'll say they were too personal to keep. The point is creating a plausible narrative." "And why the sudden marriage?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Because Clara needed a mother, and I wanted to be that for her. It's not romantic, but it's believable." "Is it?" Cole's voice was quiet. "Believable that someone like you would choose someone like me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications Evelyn wasn't ready to examine. "Yes," she said finally. "Because people make unexpected choices all the time, especially on the frontier." She turned away before he could respond, gathering their plates and washing them in the basin. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade. Soon they'd need to head back down to meet the train. To meet Clara. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she dried the plates. In a few hours, she would meet the little girl whose life depended on the lie she and Cole were constructing. A child who had already lost so much. She thought of Rachel Morrison's gap-toothed smile. The way that little girl had tried to tell Evelyn something was wrong at home. How Evelyn had been too afraid, too concerned with propriety, too convinced it wasn't her place to interfere. And how Rachel had died because of that silence. "I won't fail her," Evelyn whispered to her reflection in the window glass. "Not this time." "What?" Cole asked behind her. "Nothing." She turned, composing herself. "We should go. The train will be arriving soon." They rode back down the mountain as the sun broke briefly through the clouds, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful enough to hurt. At the bottom of the trail, where it met the main road to town, Cole pulled the wagon to a stop. "Thank you," he said. "For all of this. I know I've asked too much." "You asked exactly what you needed to ask," Evelyn interrupted. "And I said yes because—" She stopped, searching for the truth beneath her own motivations. "Because Clara deserves someone to fight for her. And maybe we both needed a reason to stop running." Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he nodded and urged the horses forward. Black Hollow Ridge appeared ahead, smoke rising from chimneys, lamps being lit against the encroaching dusk. The train station sat at the east end of town, a simple platform with a small depot building. A crowd had already gathered. Because of course they had. In a town this small, the arrival of a new child, especially the mountain man's daughter, would be news. Cole's jaw tightened when he saw the onlookers, but he didn't slow the wagon. They pulled up to the platform just as the distant whistle of the train echoed across the valley. Evelyn's heart began to race. This was real now. In minutes, Clara would step off that train, and their carefully constructed fiction would have to become convincing truth. The train appeared around the bend. a black engine trailing white steam, pulling 3 passenger cars. It slowed with a screech of brakes and a hiss of released pressure. Cole was already off the wagon, standing rigid on the platform. Evelyn climbed down and moved to stand beside him. Not touching, they hadn't established that level of comfort yet, but close enough to present a united front. The passenger car doors opened. A conductor appeared first, helping passengers down. An elderly couple. A traveling salesman with his sample cases. A woman with 2 small children. And then, a little girl stepped onto the platform. She was tiny, much smaller than 7 years seemed like it should be. Dark hair pulled into 2 braids, dark eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. She wore a black dress that was clearly mourning clothes, and she clutched a carpet bag almost as big as herself with white-knuckled determination. Clara. Evelyn felt her heart break and reform in the space of a single breath. Cole moved forward, his steps uncertain. He removed his hat and knelt on one knee so he'd be at Clara's eye level. Clara? His voice cracked on her name. I'm Cole Mercer. I'm your father. The little girl stared at him with an expression that was far too old, far too guarded. She didn't cry, didn't reach for him, just stood there holding her bag like it was the only solid thing left in her world. And then she spoke. Why didn't you come for us? 4 words that hit like bullets. Cole's entire body flinched. Around them, the crowd went silent. Even the conductor stopped moving, frozen by the raw pain in that child's voice. Cole started, then stopped. His hands shook. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know you existed, or I would have. Mama said you didn't want us. That's not true. Cole's voice broke completely. I left because I thought I was too broken to deserve your mother. I thought she'd be better off without me. But I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Clara. Tears were streaming down his face now, this giant mountain man kneeling in front of a 7-year-old girl, crying in front of the entire town. It was the most honest thing Evelyn had ever witnessed. Clara's careful composure cracked slightly. Mama died. I know, and I'm sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I never got to meet her again. Sorry for every single day I should have been with you both. Are you going to leave again? No. Cole's voice was absolute. Never. You're stuck with me now, whether you like it or not. The faintest hint of something that might someday become a smile flickered across Clara's face. I have a lot of books. We'll make room for all of them. And I don't like loud noises. Then I'll be quiet. And sometimes I have nightmares. Then I'll be there when you wake up. Clara considered this, her dark eyes studying her father's face like she was reading a map to decide if she could trust the path ahead. Finally, she set down her carpet bag and took a single, hesitant step forward. Cole opened his arms, and Clara walked into them. The embrace was awkward. A man who'd forgotten how to be gentle learning on the fly. A little girl who'd learned not to trust promises. But it was real. And standing there on the platform, watching them cling to each other, Evelyn Hart felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. She wiped them away quickly as Clara pulled back from Cole and turned to look at her. Who are you? The little girl asked. Evelyn knelt down as well, meeting Clara at eye level the way Cole had. My name is Evelyn. She hesitated, tasting the lie. I'm married to your father, which means I'm your stepmother, if that's all right with you. Clara's eyes, intelligent, assessing, missing nothing, studied Evelyn's face. Did you know my mama? No, but I wish I had. She was pretty, and she sang songs. I'd like to hear about her, Evelyn said honestly. Whenever you want to tell me. Clara nodded slowly. Then, surprising them both, she reached out and took Evelyn's hand. The small fingers were cold from the journey. Evelyn wrapped them in her own warmer ones and felt something fundamental shift in her universe. This was why she'd said yes. Not for Cole, not for the money, for this little girl who deserved someone to show up for her. Are we going home now? Clara asked. Home. Such a simple word. Such an impossible promise. Yes, Cole said, standing and picking up Clara's carpet bag. We're going home. The crowd parted as they walked back to the wagon. Evelyn could feel their stares, hear their whispers. By tomorrow, every detail of this scene would be embellished and repeated across the territory. But right now, none of that mattered. Cole helped Clara into the wagon, then offered his hand to Evelyn. She took it, their first deliberate voluntary touch, and let him steady her onto the bench. Clara sat between them, small and quiet, still wearing her too-old expression. As they rolled out of town toward the mountains, Evelyn felt the little girl's hand slip into hers again. She squeezed gently, and Clara squeezed back. Behind them, the sun was setting in shades of orange and purple. Ahead, the mountains rose dark against the sky. And between them, a 7-year-old girl who had just lost everything was taking her first tentative steps toward believing that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something new. Something like home. Something like family. Even if none of them knew yet what that actually meant. The wagon climbed back into the mountains as darkness settled over the valley like a blanket. Clara sat pressed against Evelyn's side, her small body radiating exhaustion and wariness in equal measure. She hadn't spoken since leaving town, just stared at the darkening landscape with those two knowing eyes. Cole drove in silence, his jaw tight with concentration as the trail grew harder to see. The temperature was dropping fast. Evelyn could see her breath in the air, and she wrapped her arm around Clara without thinking, pulling the child closer for warmth. Clara stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed against her. "How much further?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Another hour, maybe less if the moon comes out." Cole glanced at Clara. "There's blankets in the back if she's cold." "I'm not cold," Clara said, her first words in miles. "Mama said frontier girls don't complain about weather." Something flickered across Cole's face, pain and pride tangled together. "Your mama was tough. She cried at night sometimes, when she thought I was sleeping." Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reciting grocery lists instead of describing her mother's grief. "She looked at your picture and cried." Cole's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. "I'm sorry." "You already said that." "I'll probably say it a lot more before we're done." Clara considered this. "Okay." The trail wound higher, switching back and forth across the mountainside. On one side, trees pressed close enough to brush the wagon. On the other, empty darkness dropped away into nothing. Evelyn tried not to look at the drop-offs, tried not to calculate how many ways this journey could end in disaster. "Do you get scared up here?" Clara asked suddenly. "Every single time," Cole admitted. "But Stella knows the way better than I do. She's never let me down yet." "Stella's the horse?" "Best horse in the territory, smarter than most people I've met." The faintest hint of a smile crossed Clara's face. "Mama said horses have better sense than men. Your mama was a wise woman." They fell back into silence, but it felt different now. Less hostile. More like three people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without causing additional damage. The moon finally emerged from behind the clouds, painting the snow in shades of silver and blue. The cabin appeared ahead, a dark shape with warm light glowing in the windows. Cole had left lamps burning before they departed that morning. It looked almost welcoming. Cole brought the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then reached up to help Clara. The little girl hesitated, studying him before finally allowing herself to be lifted. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and grief wrapped in a too-small body. Evelyn climbed down on her own, grabbing Clara's carpet bag from the wagon bed. The wind cut through her coat like it was made of paper. This was going to be a brutal winter. "Come inside," Cole said, leading them to the door. "It's warmer than it looks." He pushed it open and stood back, letting Clara enter first. Evelyn followed, watching the little girl's reaction to what would now be her home. Clara stopped just inside the threshold, looking around slowly. Her eyes took in the rough furniture, the stone fireplace, the bearskin rug, the shadows dancing on the log walls. It was nothing like Kansas City, nothing like whatever home she'd known with her mother. "It's small," Clara said finally. "Yes." Cole didn't try to defend it. "But it's sturdy, keeps the cold out and the bears away." "There are bears?" "Sometimes, but they won't bother you as long as you stay smart about food storage and don't wander off alone." Clara nodded like this was perfectly reasonable information. "Where's my room?" Cole moved to the doorway he'd installed just that morning. "Right here." Clara walked past him and stood in the middle of the small space, turning slowly. Her eyes found the carved bedposts, the polished stones catching lamplight, the shelf waiting for books. She set her carpet bag on the floor and walked to the window, looking out at darkness and stars. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, "You made this for me." It wasn't a question. "I tried," Cole said quietly from the doorway. "I know it's not fancy, but Mama would have liked it." Clara's voice was very small. She always said home wasn't about fancy. It was about people trying. Cole's throat worked like he was trying to swallow something sharp. Evelyn stepped forward, sensing they both needed rescue from the weight of the moment. "Let's get you settled, Clara. I'm sure you're exhausted from the journey." She helped Clara unpack the carpet bag, a pitifully small collection of belongings for an entire life. 3 dresses, all black, undergarments, a hairbrush, a rag doll with button eyes and yarn hair, and at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, a leather-bound book. Clara took the book and held it against her chest. Mama's journal. She wrote in it every day. "That's a precious thing to have," Evelyn said softly. "She wrote about him." Clara glanced at Cole, who was still standing in the doorway looking lost. About how they met, about the mine accident, about how she waited for him to come back. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of pain spreading outward. "Clara, Cole started. "She loved you until she died," the little girl continued, her voice steady despite the tears starting to slide down her cheeks. "Even though you left, even though you never wrote. She told me stories about you every night and said someday you'd find us again. I'm so sorry." "I know." Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. "But sorry doesn't bring her back. Nothing brings her back." The brutal honesty of childhood grief. No cushioning, no gentle processing, just raw truth spoken aloud. Evelyn knelt beside Clara and very gently touched her shoulder. "You're right. Nothing brings her back. But you're allowed to be angry about that. Angry at everyone, including him." Clara looked at her with something like relief, like she'd been given permission for emotions she'd been trying to control. "I am angry," she whispered. "All the time. At everything. That's normal." "Mama said I had to be brave." "Being angry doesn't mean you're not brave," Evelyn said. "Sometimes anger is the bravest thing we have." Clara studied her face, then nodded slowly. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from crying too much and sleeping too little and carrying weights too heavy for small shoulders. "Can I go to bed now?" she asked. She ought. "Of course." Evelyn helped her change into a nightgown, another piece of mourning black that felt wrong on a child, and tucked her into the bed Cole had built. The mattress was thick and soft, the blankets warm and smelling of cedar. Clara curled on her side, clutching her mother's journal. "Will you stay, just until I fall asleep?" "As long as you need." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting lightly on Clara's shoulder. In the doorway, Cole watched them both with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. After a moment, he turned and disappeared into the main room. Clara's breathing gradually slowed and deepened. Just when Evelyn thought she'd fallen asleep, the little girl spoke again. "Are you really married to him, or are you just pretending?" The question cut straight through every carefully constructed lie. Evelyn's first instinct was to maintain the fiction, to protect the narrative they'd created for the judge's benefit. But looking at this grieving child who'd already been lied to enough, she found she couldn't do it. "It's complicated," she said carefully. "Your father needed help to make sure you could stay with him. And I wanted to help. So we got married very quickly, maybe too quickly to really know each other yet. So you're pretending. We're trying to figure out what we are." Evelyn searched for honesty that wouldn't betray Cole or frighten Clara. "But I promise you this. I'm not pretending about wanting you to have a home. That part is completely real." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Okay? Okay? Grown-ups lie all the time. At least you're admitting it." She yawned, fighting sleep. "Mama said the best people are the ones who tell you when they don't have answers." "Your mama sounds like she was very smart." "She was." Clara's eyes finally closed. "I miss her so much it hurts." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Within minutes, Clara's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. Evelyn sat there a while longer, watching her, trying to reconcile the fierce little girl who'd arrived on the train with the vulnerable child now curled beneath blankets in a stranger's cabin. Finally, she stood carefully and moved to the doorway. The stones hanging in the window chimed softly as she passed. Cole sat at the rough table in the main room, staring at his hands. He looked up when Evelyn emerged. She asleep? Yes. Evelyn sank into the other chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The day felt like it had lasted a week. She's strong, stronger than she should have to be. She asked if we were pretending, didn't she? Evelyn met his eyes. Yes. What did you tell her? A version of the truth. Evelyn's voice was steady. That we got married quickly to help her stay with you. That we're still figuring out what we are to each other. Cole nodded slowly. She deserves honesty. She's already been lied to enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the wind picking up outside. I don't know how to do this, Cole said finally. I look at her and I see Sarah. I hear her voice and I want to apologize for things that can't be fixed. I'm terrified I'm going to say the wrong thing or push too hard or not be enough. You'll make mistakes, Evelyn said bluntly. We both will, but showing up and trying, that matters more than being perfect. Is that what you're doing? Showing up and trying? The question was more complex than it seemed. Evelyn thought about the $300 currently buried under the cabin floor, about the marriage certificate folded in her bag, about the little girl sleeping in the next room who'd already grabbed hold of her heart. Yes, she said, I suppose I am. Cole stood and moved to the fireplace, adding another log. Orange light flickered across his face, highlighting the scars and premature gray and lines carved by years of isolation. The judge arrives tomorrow afternoon, he said, to inspect the home and determine if it's suitable. I know. What if he sees through us? What if he can tell this is all? Then we make it convincing, Evelyn interrupted. We act like a family that's still finding its footing but committed to making it work, which is actually true in a strange way. How do we do that? Evelyn stood and walked to where he stood by the fire. We start by being honest with each other about what we can and can't do. No pretending to be something we're not. Just two people trying to give a child a stable home. Cole looked down at her, and for the first time Evelyn noticed the color of his eyes. Gray, like winter skies before snow. There was intelligence there, and pain, and something that might have been hope trying to survive despite everything. Why are you really here? He asked quietly. It's not just about Clara. There's something you're running from. We agreed not to ask about each other's pasts. I know, but we're supposed to be married. The judge will expect us to know something about each other. He was right. Evelyn had been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't thought through the details of their cover story. Fine. She moved away from him, putting distance between them. I was a school teacher in Missouri. 3 years ago, one of my students tried to tell me something was wrong at home. I didn't listen, didn't push, didn't report it to anyone because I was afraid of making waves with the wrong family. Her voice went flat, emotionless. The only way she could get through the story. That winter, the girl died. The official story was influenza, but I knew better. And I couldn't prove anything, couldn't change anything, couldn't fix what my silence had allowed to happen. So I left. Came west where nobody knew me. Tried to become invisible. Cole didn't say anything for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. That's why you said yes. Clara reminded you of her. Rachel. Her name was Rachel Morrison. Evelyn's hands were shaking. And yes, I said yes because I couldn't save Rachel, but maybe I could help save Clara. That's not your fault. What happened to Rachel? Isn't it? Evelyn's voice turned sharp. I was the adult. I was supposed to protect her. Instead, I protected myself and let her suffer. You were scared. That's human. Human isn't good enough when a child's life is at stake. Cole was quiet, absorbing this. Then, the mine collapse that killed 16 men. I should have died with them. I was in the deepest shaft when it happened. Got pinned under a beam for 6 hours before they dug me out. Crushed 3 vertebrae, broke both legs, punctured a lung. He pulled up his shirt, showing Evelyn the scars that crisscrossed his back. Thick, raised lines where surgeons had cut him open to repair the damage. Doctors said I'd never walk right again. Spent 4 months in a hospital bed, and every day I wished they'd just let me die with the others. Felt like I'd stolen their chance at life by surviving when they hadn't. He lowered his shirt and met Evelyn's eyes. When I could finally move, I ran. Told myself Sarah deserved better than a cripple who couldn't even work in the mines anymore. Convinced myself I was being noble by leaving, but really, I was just a coward who couldn't face his own pain. So we're both cowards, Evelyn said quietly, or just people who made mistakes and are trying to do better. Is that what this is? Doing better? I don't know. Cole returned to his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. But it's the only chance I've got. Evelyn sat down across from him again. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. And in the small room to the left, a little girl slept without knowing that the two adults in the next room were both broken people trying to pretend they knew how to be a family. We should establish some ground rules, Evelyn said, for tomorrow, for the judge. All right. First, we need to be able to touch each other without it looking awkward. Not intimately, but comfortably. The way married people do. She hated how clinical she sounded. A hand on the shoulder, sitting close, that kind of thing. Cole nodded slowly. I can do that. Second, we need a consistent story about our courtship, how we met, when we fell in love, why we married quickly. What if we stick close to the truth? We met at the general store, started talking, realized we understood each other in ways other people didn't. When I found out about Clara, you offered to help. That works. Evelyn made mental notes. Third, we need to be able to finish each other's sentences, show familiarity, little details that prove we know each other. Like what? Like, Evelyn thought, you take your coffee black. You can't sleep if the fire goes out. You have nightmares about the mine collapse. Cole's expression shifted. How did you know that? You mentioned spending 4 months in a hospital bed. Trauma like that doesn't just disappear, and I saw you check the fire twice since we sat down. He stared at her like she'd just performed magic. You notice things. It's a survival skill. Evelyn's voice was dry. Now your turn. Tell me something about me. Cole studied her for a moment. You're left-handed. You hide it most of the time, but when you tucked Clara in, you used your left hand naturally. And you don't like being touched unexpectedly. When I helped you into the wagon earlier, you flinched even though you tried to cover it. Evelyn's breath caught. He was more observant than she'd given him credit for. Anything else? You keep secrets the way other people keep weapons. Close and ready to use if necessary. His voice was gentle. And whatever happened in Missouri still haunts you every single day. That's not your turn, Cole interrupted. Truth for truth, that was the rule. Evelyn swallowed hard. Fine. Yes. I think about Rachel every day. Every child I see, every time I hear a little girl laugh. It's always there. That's why you left teaching. I couldn't look at students anymore without seeing her. Couldn't stand in front of a classroom without remembering how I failed. She stood abruptly. I should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. There's only the one bedroom, Cole said. Clara's room. I've been sleeping up in the loft, but with you here... I'll take the loft. You should stay down here in case Clara wakes up and needs you. Evelyn, it's fine. She was already moving toward the ladder. I've slept in worse places. That wasn't true, but she needed distance. The conversation had peeled back too many layers too quickly, and she felt raw and exposed. The loft was a narrow platform tucked under the pitched roof, accessible by a rough wooden ladder. A rope bed with a thin mattress took up most of the space. Evelyn climbed up and lay down fully clothed, pulling a blanket over herself. Below, she could hear Cole banking the fire, checking the door, moving around with the practiced efficiency of someone used to living alone. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the day, the wedding that wasn't real, the little girl who'd asked if they were pretending, the scars on Cole's back and the pain in his eyes when he talked about Sarah. And underneath it all, the constant awareness that tomorrow a judge would arrive to determine if their hastily constructed lie could pass as truth. Evelyn must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to pale dawn light filtering through gaps in the roof boards and the smell of burning food. She climbed down the ladder to find Cole standing at the stove, staring in dismay at what had probably started as breakfast and was now approaching charcoal. I can't cook, he said without preamble. I mean, I can make things edible enough to survive, but this, he gestured at the smoking pan. This is a disaster. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. Move. She took over the stove, salvaging what she could and starting fresh with the limited supplies available. Within 20 minutes, she had actual breakfast prepared. Eggs that weren't rubber, bread that was only slightly burned, coffee that could pass for drinkable. Clara emerged from her room looking small and lost in her black dress. Her hair had come loose from its braids and hung in tangles around her face. "Good morning," Evelyn said gently. "Are you hungry?" Clara nodded silently and climbed onto one of the chairs. She accepted the plate Evelyn offered and ate mechanically, like fueling herself was just another task to complete. Cole sat across from her, clearly wanting to say something but not knowing what. Finally, he settled on, "Did you sleep all right?" "No." Clara's honesty was brutal. "I dreamed about Mama. She was calling for me, but I couldn't find her. I'm sorry." "You're always sorry." There was no heat in her voice, just observation. "But sorry doesn't fix nightmares. No, it doesn't." Cole pushed his food around his plate. "Is there anything that does help? When you have bad dreams?" Clara thought about this. "Mama used to sing to me, the same song every time. It didn't make the dreams go away, but it helped me fall back asleep." "I don't know any songs," Cole admitted. I can't do what she did." "I know." Clara looked at him directly. "You're not her. You're just you, and I don't know you yet." "That's fair." "But you built me a room." Her voice softened slightly. "So maybe you're trying." "I am. I promise I'm trying." They finished breakfast in silence. Afterward, Evelyn helped Clara wash and braid her hair while Cole cleaned the dishes with the kind of concentration usually reserved for diffusing explosives. "The judge comes today," Clara said as Evelyn worked the tangles from her hair. "That's why you're both nervous." There was no point lying. "Yes." "What happens if he says I can't stay?" Evelyn's hands paused. "Your father and I will do everything we can to prevent that. But what if it's not enough?" "Then we'll figure out another way." Evelyn resumed braiding, keeping her voice steady. "But let's not borrow trouble before it arrives." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you want me here? Or are you just doing this because he asked?" The question deserved complete honesty. "At first, I was doing it because he asked," Evelyn admitted. "But then I met you at the train station, and I saw a little girl who'd lost everything but was still standing up straight and asking hard questions, and I thought, this is someone worth fighting for. Even though you don't really know me, especially because I don't really know you yet, that means we get to figure each other out together." Clara turned around, studying Evelyn's face with that unsettling intensity. "You're not like other grown-ups." "How so?" "You don't talk to me like I'm stupid or like I'm too young to understand things." She hesitated. "My teacher in Kansas City used to do that. Talk in that special voice people use when they think children are fragile." "You're not fragile." "No." Claire's voice was firm. "I'm angry and sad and scared, but I'm not fragile." "Good." Evelyn tied off the second braid. "Stay that way. The world tries to make girls fragile. Don't let it." For the first time since arriving, Clara smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before disappearing again, but it had existed. Progress. The morning passed in tense preparation. Cole chopped firewood with more force than necessary. Evelyn straightened the cabin for the 5th time, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. Clara sat at the table with her mother's journal, reading silently. Around 11, the sound of wagon wheels on frozen ground announced the judge's arrival earlier than expected. Evelyn and Cole exchanged a look. This was it. Cole opened the door to reveal a man in his 50s climbing down from an official-looking carriage. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather satchel, and his face had the stern expression of someone who'd seen too many families fail to provide adequate homes for children. "Mr. Mercer," the judge extended his hand. "I'm Judge Nathaniel Blackwood. We spoke via correspondence." "Yes, sir." Cole shook his hand. "Thank you for coming all this way." Blackwood's eyes moved past Cole to Evelyn, then down to Clara standing behind her. "And you must be Mrs. Mercer, and this is Clara." "Yes." Evelyn stepped forward, very deliberately taking Cole's hand. The touch was awkward at first, but she held on. "Please come in. Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be appreciated." They moved inside, and Evelyn felt Blackwood's assessing gaze taking in every detail. The rough furniture, the bearskin rug, the stone fireplace, Clara's open door showing the small room beyond. "Quite isolated up here," Blackwood observed. 2 hours to town in good weather, Cole agreed, but we have supplies for winter, and the cabin's sturdy. And schooling for the child? There's a school in Black Hollow Ridge, Evelyn said, pouring coffee with steady hands. We're arranging for Clara to board in town during the school term with a reputable family. This was the first Cole had heard of specific arrangements, but he nodded like it was already decided. Blackwood accepted the coffee and sat at the table. Clara remained standing near the fireplace, watching him with wary eyes. "Clara," the judge said gently, "how are you settling in?" "Fine." Her voice was carefully neutral. "Your room is adequate?" "It's nice." He carved animals into the bed. "And Mrs. Mercer, you're comfortable with her?" Clara glanced at Evelyn, and something passed between them that Evelyn couldn't quite name. "Yes, she doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass." Blackwood made a note in a small book he'd pulled from his satchel. "Mr. Mercer, I'd like to speak with you privately. Mrs. Mercer, perhaps you could show Clara outside for a few minutes." Evelyn's stomach dropped, but she nodded. "Of course. Clara, why don't you show me where your father gets water?" They bundled into coats and stepped outside into air cold enough to burn. Clara led her to a creek about 50 yards from the cabin, partially frozen but still flowing. "He's going to ask if we're really married," Clara said matter-of-factly. "Probably. What will you say?" Evelyn knelt beside the creek, looking at the ice crystals forming along the edges. "The truth. That we got married 2 days ago. That we're still learning about each other. That we both want you to have a home." "That's not the whole truth." "No, but it's the truth that matters right now." Clara was quiet, breath fogging in the cold air. "I don't want to go to an orphanage." "You're not going to an orphanage." "How do you know?" "Because your father built you a room with carved animals and polished stones. Because he cried when he met you at the train station. Because he's terrified of failing you, which means he cares enough to try not to." "And you?" Evelyn met the little girl's eyes. "And I've already failed one child. I'm not failing another." Inside the cabin, Cole sat across from Judge Blackwood, his hands gripping his knees to keep them from shaking. "This is a rather sudden marriage," Blackwood observed. "Yes, sir." "You've known Mrs. Mercer how long?" Cole forced himself to meet the judge's eyes. 4 months since we first met, but I didn't start courting her seriously until 6 weeks ago." "And when you received news about Clara?" "I asked Evelyn to marry me that same day." Cole's voice was steady. "I know it seems fast, but I needed to provide a proper home for my daughter, and Evelyn, she understood what Clara needed better than I did." "Some might say you married out of desperation rather than love." They'd be right. Cole's honesty seemed to surprise Blackwood. "I was desperate, still am, but that doesn't mean Evelyn and I don't have a real partnership forming. She's already better with Clara than I am. She knows how to talk to her, how to help her process grief. I'm learning." "You were estranged from Clara's mother for 7 years." "Yes, sir. I made a terrible mistake leaving Sarah. Thought I was too broken after the mine accident to be any good to anyone. Convinced myself she'd be better off without me." His voice roughened. "I was wrong. And by the time I realized it, too much time had passed. I didn't know Sarah had died. Didn't know Clara existed until last week. That's quite a lot to process in a short time." "It is, and I'm not handling it perfectly. But I'm showing up. I'm trying. And with Evelyn's help, I think we can give Clara a real home." Blackwood made more notes. "The cabin is remote." "Yes. Winter will make it more isolated. We have supplies. And if there's an emergency, I know every trail down this mountain in any weather." "What about Clara's education? Her socialization with other children?" "Evelyn's a former school teacher. She can work with Clara here until the school term starts. Then we'll board her in town during the week and have her home on weekends." This was also new information Cole was improvising on the spot, but it sounded plausible. Blackwood studied him for a long moment. "You're aware that many men in your situation would simply hand the child over to an orphanage rather than attempting to raise her themselves?" "Yes, sir." "Why aren't you doing that?" Cole thought about the photograph the lawyer had sent. Clara's dark eyes staring at the camera, already holding too much loss. "Sarah's daughter. His daughter." "Because she's mine," he said simply. "Because her mother loved me despite everything, and the least I can do is try to honor that by loving our daughter, and because—" his voice cracked slightly. "Because maybe taking care of her is how I finally start taking care of myself." Blackwood closed his notebook. "I'd like to see Clara's room," They stood, and Cole led him to the small space he'd built. Blackwood examined everything, the carved bedpost, the stones in the window, the shelf with Clara's few books already arranged. "You built this yourself?" "Yes, sir. Started the day I got the letter about Clara." "Before you even knew if she'd be allowed to stay with you?" Cole met his eyes. "I built it because she needed a home. Whether I was allowed to provide it or not, I wanted her to know someone cared enough to try." Outside, the sound of Evelyn and Clara returning made them both turn. The door opened and Clara entered first, her cheeks red from cold. She stopped when she saw them in her room. "It's all right," Blackwood said gently. "I was just admiring your father's carpentry work." Clara moved to the bed and touched one of the carved animals. "He made them all different, so they'd have personalities." "Did he tell you that?" "No, I figured it out by looking." She glanced at Cole. "The rabbit is careful, the deer is brave, the owl is wise, and the fox is clever." Cole stared at her, stunned. He hadn't consciously given them personalities, but looking at them now, he realized she was right. "Which one are you?" Blackwood asked. Clara thought about this. "Right now, I'm the rabbit, careful of everything, but someday I might be the fox." Despite the tension, Blackwood smiled. "I think that's a good goal." He turned to Evelyn, who had followed Clara inside. "Mrs. Mercer, walk with me outside for a moment." Evelyn's heart hammered, but she nodded and followed him out into the cold. They stood near his carriage, breath fogging between them. "You've taken on quite a responsibility," Blackwood said. "Yes, an instant family with a grieving child and a man you barely know." "I knew enough to say yes when it mattered." Blackwood's expression was unreadable. "Some would question your motives." "Let them." Evelyn's voice was steady. "I'm not here for approval. I'm here because Clara deserves a chance at a real home." "And Mr. Mercer?" "He's a good man trying to make up for past mistakes. That's more than most people manage." "You defend him quickly for someone you've only known 4 months." Evelyn met his gaze directly. "Judge Blackwood, I could stand here and pretend this is a perfect fairy tale, that Cole and I fell madly in love and everything is smooth and easy. But that would be a lie. The truth is messier. We're two damaged people trying to build something stable for a child who needs us. Is it unconventional? Yes. Is it guaranteed to work? No. But we're showing up every day and trying, and isn't that what actually matters?" Blackwood was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his notebook and wrote something final. "My ruling will be delivered in 3 days," he said. "I'll send word to Black Hollow Ridge. And until then, Clara stays here, under your supervision." He climbed into his carriage, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Mercer, I've seen hundreds of families over the years. The ones that succeed aren't always the ones that look perfect on paper. They're the ones willing to do the hard work of showing up." He drove away, leaving Evelyn standing in the snow, trembling from cold and relief and terror, all mixed together. Inside, Cole and Clara waited. When Evelyn entered, they both looked at her with identical expressions of desperate hope. "Well?" Cole asked. 3 days. He'll send his ruling in 3 days. Clara's face crumpled slightly before she caught herself. "What do we do until then?" Evelyn removed her coat and hung it by the door. "We keep being a family. Real or not, we show up and try." And for 3 days, that's exactly what they did. The first day after Blackwood's visit passed in a strange limbo, where everyone moved carefully around each other like people walking on ice they didn't quite trust. Cole chopped enough firewood to last 2 winters, attacking the logs with a ferocity that had less to do with preparation and more to do with having nowhere to put his fear. Clara sat at the table with her mother's journal, reading the same pages over and over, lips moving silently as she traced her mother's handwriting. And Evelyn cleaned things that were already clean, organized shelves that didn't need organizing, and tried not to calculate the odds of Blackwood's ruling going in their favor. By the second day, the forced stillness started cracking. "I'm bored," Clara announced at breakfast. Cole looked up from his coffee, clearly unprepared for this particular problem. "Bored? There's nothing to do. In Kansas City, I had school, and other children, and the library." She pushed eggs around her plate without eating them. "Here, there's just trees." "There's books," Cole offered weakly, gesturing to the small shelf in her room. I've read them all twice. Evelyn set down her own coffee and studied Clara's face. The child wasn't being difficult. She was grieving and displaced and trying to find something normal to hold on to. Boredom was actually a healthy sign that she was starting to process her new reality instead of just surviving it. "Can you cook?" Evelyn asked. Clara blinked. "A little. Mama taught me some things." "Good. Then today you're going to help me make bread from scratch. Real bread, not the half-burned disaster your father usually produces." "I heard that," Cole muttered. "You were meant to." Evelyn stood and began pulling out supplies. "Clara, wash your hands. Cole, you're helping too." "I can't cook." "Which is exactly why you need to learn." "What happens if Evelyn and I both get sick?" Clara said with the brutal logic of childhood. "You'd starve." Cole opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. "Fair point." The next 2 hours turned into controlled chaos. Cole measured wrong, added too much flour, and managed to get dough in his hair. Clara was precise and careful, following Evelyn's instructions exactly. Together, they produced 4 loaves, one perfect, 2 acceptable, and one that looked like it had been involved in some kind of accident. "That one's yours," Clara told her father, pointing at the misshapen loaf. "Looks about right," Cole agreed, studying his handiwork with something that might have been pride or horror. "Matches the rest of me." Clara laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so unexpected that both adults froze. The little girl clapped her hand over her mouth immediately, like she'd done something wrong. "It's okay to laugh," Evelyn said gently. "Your mother would want you to." "How do you know what Mama would want?" The words came out sharp, defensive. "Because any mother who taught her daughter to be brave and ask hard questions would want that daughter to find moments of happiness. Even in grief." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It feels wrong. Being happy when she's dead." Cole knelt beside her chair, moving slowly like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Your mama's not here anymore, and that's the worst thing in the world. But you are here, and you being happy doesn't mean you loved her less. It just means you're still alive." "How do you know?" Claire's voice broke. "You didn't even know her anymore." "You're right. I didn't." Cole's own voice was rough. "I gave up that privilege when I ran away, but I knew her once, loved her once, and the Sarah I knew, she was fierce and stubborn, and she didn't waste time on self-pity. She'd tell you to cry when you need to cry, and laugh when something's funny, and not apologize for either one." Clara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "I miss her so much." "I know, and I'm angry at her for dying." "That's allowed too." "And I'm angry at you for not being there." Cole flinched but held steady. "I deserve that." Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving flour streaks across her cheeks. "The bread smells good." The subject change was so abrupt it took Evelyn a moment to follow, but she recognized it for what it was. A child reaching her emotional limit and needing to step back from the edge. "It does," Evelyn agreed. "We'll let it cool, then you can have the first slice with butter." They ate the bread for lunch, warm and soft and better than anything that had come out of Cole's kitchen in 7 years. Clara ate 2 slices and asked if they could make cinnamon rolls next time. Cole ate half a loaf and looked simultaneously pleased and confused that he'd helped create something edible. That afternoon, when Clara went to her room for quiet time, Cole followed Evelyn outside to the woodpile. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For knowing what to do with her, how to talk to her." He picked up the axe but didn't start chopping. "I keep saying the wrong things." "You told her it was okay to be angry. That's exactly the right thing. She's so small and carrying so much. Children are stronger than adults give them credit for." Evelyn watched the clouds gathering over the eastern peaks. "But she needs consistency. She needs to know we're not going anywhere." Cole's hands tightened on the axe handle. "What if Blackwood says no? What if she gets sent to Denver and I never see her again?" "Then we fight it. Appeal. Find a lawyer. Do whatever it takes." "With what money?" "I've got $300 in a cabin. Then we figure it out." Evelyn's voice was firm. "But we don't give up before we've even heard the ruling." Cole studied her face. "You've gotten attached to her." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes." "What happens when this is over? When the judge approves and we can safely end the arrangement?" Evelyn had been avoiding thinking about that. I don't know. Because you have a job in town. A life. This was only supposed to be temporary. I know what it was supposed to be. But, she met his eyes, but nothing is turning out the way it was supposed to, and I don't have answers yet. They stood in the snow, the space between them charged with questions neither was ready to ask. Finally, Cole turned and started splitting wood with methodical precision, and Evelyn went back inside where it was warm. That night, Clara woke screaming. Evelyn was down the ladder before she was fully awake, her heart hammering. She burst into Clara's room to find the little girl sitting up in bed, sobbing and gasping for air. "She was calling me," Clara choked out. "Mama was calling, and I couldn't find her, and she kept getting further away. It was a dream." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Clara into her arms. "Just a dream. You're safe." It felt real. "I know." Cole appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled and eyes wild with panic. "Is she hurt?" "Nightmare," Evelyn said quietly. "We're okay." But Clara reached for him. "Don't go." Cole crossed the room and sat on the other side of the bed, and suddenly they were both there. Two people who barely knew this child, trying to be what she needed in the dark. "Mama used to sing," Clara whispered, "but you said you don't know songs." "I don't," Cole admitted, "but maybe... Would it help to talk about her? Tell us something good you remember?" Clara was quiet for a moment, then she made up stories about a girl who lived in a castle made of books and went on adventures with a talking cat named Professor Whiskers. "What kind of adventures?" Evelyn asked. "All kinds. Fighting dragons, solving mysteries, finding treasure." Clara's breathing was starting to slow. "The girl's name was Clara, but she was braver than me." "I bet you're braver than you think," Cole said. "Story Clara wasn't afraid of anything." "Real Clara got on a train by herself and came to live with strangers in the mountains. That's pretty brave." Clara considered this. "I guess." "Tell us more about Professor Whiskers," Evelyn prompted. Clara talked until her eyes grew heavy, describing elaborate adventures her mother had invented. Eventually her voice trailed off and her breathing deepened into sleep. But when Evelyn tried to move, Clara's hand tightened on her arm. "Stay," the little girl mumbled. "Both of you." Evelyn looked at Cole across the bed. He shrugged helplessly. They stayed, sitting on opposite sides of Clara's bed as she slept between them, both uncomfortable and neither willing to leave. At some point, Evelyn's eyes closed despite her best efforts. She woke near dawn to find her head resting against the wall, her hand still holding Clara's, and Cole asleep sitting up with his chin on his chest. The morning light through the window made the polished stones chime softly. Clara stirred and opened her eyes, looking confused to find both adults still there. "You stayed," she said, like it was a miracle. "We said we would," Evelyn replied. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a tiny crack in the defensive walls she'd built. "Okay." Just that. "Okay." But it meant everything. The third day arrived with heavy clouds and the smell of snow in the air. By afternoon, the first flakes were falling, fat and lazy at first, then faster and thicker until the world outside the cabin windows turned white. "It's really coming down," Cole observed, standing at the window. "This might be a big one." "How big?" Evelyn asked. "Could be 3 feet before it's done, maybe more." Clara pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass. "I've never seen this much snow." "Kansas City gets snow," Cole said. "Not like this. Not where you can't see anything but white." The storm intensified through the afternoon. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters and finding gaps in the chinking between logs. Cole kept the fire built high, and Evelyn made stew with the last of the fresh vegetables before they'd have to rely entirely on preserved food. They were eating dinner when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not snow, something else. Cole's head snapped up. "Stay here." He grabbed his rifle from where he'd moved it to a high shelf and went to the door. When he opened it, snow blew in along with something else, a horse's whinny, desperate and close. "Someone's out there," Cole said. He shrugged into his coat. "In this storm, they won't last an hour." "You can't go out in that," Evelyn protested. "You'll get lost yourself." "I know these mountains." He was already wrapping a rope around his waist, tying the other end to the porch post. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, pull this rope. It'll lead you to me." He disappeared into the whiteout before Evelyn could argue further. Clara stood frozen by the table. What if he doesn't come back? He'll come back. Evelyn said it with more confidence than she felt. They waited. 10 minutes. 15. Evelyn's hand gripped the rope, ready to pull if necessary. At 18 minutes, shapes emerged from the snow. Cole supporting a figure that was barely standing, leading a horse that looked half dead from cold. Evelyn threw the door open and helped Cole half carry the stranger inside. It was a man, maybe 30, ice-crusted in his beard and his lips blue with cold. His horse stood steaming in the snow, shaking violently. "Get the horse in the lean-to," Cole ordered. "I'll deal with him." Evelyn and Clara managed to coax the horse into the small stable and rub it down with dry cloths. By the time they got back inside, Cole had the stranger wrapped in blankets by the fire, forcing hot coffee between his lips. "Name's William," the man managed through chattering teeth. "William Porter. I was trying to make it to Black Hollow Ridge before the storm hit. Didn't realize how fast it would come in." "You're lucky to be alive," Cole said bluntly. "Another hour and you'd have frozen to death." "I know." Porter's hands shook around the coffee cup. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay." "You can repay me by not dying in my mountains and making me bury you in frozen ground." Despite the situation, Porter laughed. "Fair enough." They gave him more coffee, then stew, and slowly the color returned to his face. He explained he was a surveyor working for the railroad, checking potential routes through the territory. He'd been staying in a boarding house in Ridge Creek, a settlement 2 days' ride north, and was heading south when the storm caught him. "You'll stay here tonight," Cole said. It wasn't an offer, just a statement of fact. "Storm like this won't clear before morning, maybe longer. I don't want to impose—" "You'll impose more if you die, and I have to feel guilty about it." Porter smiled and accepted another cup of coffee from Evelyn. His eyes took in the cabin, the rough furniture, the child watching him from the corner, the woman who was clearly making this place more livable than it had been. "Family?" he asked. "Yes," Cole said at the same time Evelyn said, "It's complicated." Porter's eyebrows rose, but he was smart enough not to push. They made up a bedroll for him near the fire. Clara had gone quiet again, watching the stranger with wary eyes. Before bed, she pulled Evelyn aside. "Do you trust him?" the little girl whispered. "Your father brought him inside. That's trust enough." "But what if he's dangerous?" Evelyn knelt down. "What if he's just a man who made a mistake trying to outrun a storm? Most people aren't dangerous, Clara. They're just trying to survive like everyone else." "How do you know which is which?" "You don't. Always. But you can't go through life assuming everyone wants to hurt you." Clara thought about this. "Mama said I should trust my instincts." "And what do your instincts say about Mr. Porter?" Clara studied the man across the room, curled in blankets and already half asleep. "That he's scared too, just like us. Then maybe we help him get unscared, the way someone helped us." That night, the storm raged until the cabin felt like a ship in rough seas, tossed by wind, surrounded by darkness, holding together through sheer stubbornness. But inside, 5 souls waited out the violence. A surveyor who'd made bad calculations, a child learning to trust again, a woman running from guilt, a man trying to become worthy of second chances, and a horse that had simply followed its rider into disaster and out the other side. Morning broke clear and cold, the kind of crystalline brightness that follows serious storms. The world outside was transformed, buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the sunlight like someone had scattered diamonds across the mountains. Porter stood at the window, taking in the view. "I've surveyed half this territory. Never seen it like this." "It's beautiful when it's trying to kill you," Cole agreed. "Makes you forget to be afraid until it's too late." "Sounds like you're speaking from experience." 7 winters up here teaches you respect." Porter turned from the window. "I should try to make it down to Black Hollow Ridge. Let folks know I'm not dead. Trail won't be passable yet. Give it another day for the snow to settle." Cole poured coffee for everyone. "Besides, you owe me a story about why a railroad surveyor was stupid enough to try outrunning a mountain storm." Porter laughed, but there was something pained in it. "Fair enough. Though it's not much of a story, just a man who thought he could control things he couldn't." "Seems to be going around," Evelyn murmured. They spent the day snowbound, an odd collection of people thrown together by circumstance. Porter told stories about surveying routes through impossible terrain, about railroad men who thought they could build tracks anywhere money could reach. Clara listened with wide eyes, asking questions that were sometimes too smart for her age. "Why do the railroad people want to build through the mountains?" she asked. "Because mountains are in the way," Porter explained, "and people don't like things being in their way." "But maybe the mountains like being in the way. Maybe that's their job." Porter blinked, then smiled. "You know what? Maybe you're right." Later, when Clara was in her room reading, Porter asked the question he'd clearly been holding back. "How long have you three been together?" 5 days, Cole said honestly. Porter choked on his coffee. 5 days? "It's a long story. I've got time. I'm snowbound." So Cole told him, not everything, but enough. About Clara's mother dying, about getting the letter, about needing a wife immediately to keep his daughter from being sent to an orphanage. And Mrs. Mercer agreed to this? Porter looked stunned. "I agreed," Evelyn said, coming in from checking on Clara, "because a little girl needed help and no one else was offering. That's extraordinary." "It's practical," Evelyn corrected, "and temporary." "Is it?" Porter's gaze moved between them. "Because from where I'm sitting, you three look like you're figuring out how to be a family." "We barely know each other," Cole protested. "Some of the best partnerships start that way. No expectations, just people showing up and doing the work." Porter set down his coffee cup. "I was married once, met my wife when we were children, courted her for 6 years, married with everyone's blessing. Lasted 18 months before she left me for a banker in Chicago." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "Don't be. We knew everything about each other except how to actually live together. Sometimes not knowing is better. Gives you room to build something new instead of trying to fit into shapes you think you're supposed to be." His words hung in the air long after he'd gone back to watching the snow. That evening, Clara asked if she could go outside and see the snow properly. Cole agreed but insisted on staying close. They bundled up and stepped into a world transformed, everything buried, everything silent except for the sound of their boots crunching through the powder. Clara made snow angels while Cole and Porter cleared a path to the lean-to stable. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching them all, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. This wasn't the life she'd planned. Wasn't the safe, invisible existence she'd built in Black Hollow Ridge. This was messy and complicated and full of people who needed things from her. And somehow, impossibly, it felt more real than anything she'd experienced in 3 years. "You're thinking too hard." She turned to find Cole standing beside her. When he'd approached, she had no idea. "Someone has to," she said. "About what?" "About what happens after Blackwood's ruling. About how this all plays out." Cole was quiet for a moment. "And what are you thinking?" Evelyn watched Clara trying to build a snowman with Porter's help, the little girl's laughter carrying across the white expanse. "I'm thinking I don't want to leave." The admission surprised her as much as it clearly surprised Cole. "You don't have to," he said carefully. "I mean, I know we agreed this was temporary, but if you wanted to stay, it wouldn't be fair to you or to Clara. I'd just be prolonging something that isn't real." "Who says it isn't real?" Cole's voice was quiet but intense. "We got married. We're living together. We're raising a child. What part of that isn't real? The part where we did it all for the wrong reasons." "Maybe we started for the wrong reasons, but that doesn't mean it has to stay that way." Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. At the gray in his hair and the scars on his hands, and the way he watched Clara like she was something precious he was terrified of breaking. This man who'd built a room with carved bedposts for a daughter he'd never met, who cried in front of an entire town rather than hide his grief, who'd run into a blizzard to save a stranger. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying I don't know what we are yet, but I know I don't want you to go." He paused, searching for words. "I know that's selfish. You have your own life, your own plans. I don't have plans. I've been running for 3 years without any destination, just away from things." "Then maybe stop running. Stay here. Help me figure out how to be a father. Help Clara heal. And maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what?" "Maybe we figure out how to be something to each other. I don't know what, but something." Before Evelyn could respond, Clara's voice rang out across the snow. "Look, I made a snow family." They both turned to see 3 snow figures lined up. One tall, one medium, one small. Crude but clearly intentional. That's us, Clara announced proudly. The tall one is Papa, the middle one is Evelyn, and the small one is me. Porter stood beside her, grinning. I think you've got real artistic talent. Clara beamed, then looked toward the porch where Cole and Evelyn stood. Do you like it? It's perfect, Cole called back. And it was. Wonky and misshapen and absolutely perfect. The next morning, Porter's trail down the mountain was finally passable. Cole helped him prepare his horse and supplies for the journey to Black Hollow Ridge. Thank you again, Porter said, shaking Cole's hand. You saved my life. Just returning the favor the mountains did for me once. Porter turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Mercer, it was a pleasure, and if I may offer unsolicited advice, please don't, Evelyn said, but she was smiling. Whatever you three are building here, it's worth fighting for. I've seen a lot of families in my surveying work. Most of them are just people going through motions. But you three are actually trying. That's rarer than you think. He rode away, leaving tracks in the fresh snow that would be filled in by the next storm. Clara watched him go from the porch. Will we see him again? Maybe, Cole said. The territory isn't that big. I liked him. He told good stories. He did. Papa? Clara's voice was small. When Mr. Blackwood's letter comes, what if it says I have to leave? Cole knelt in the snow so he could look her in the eye. Then we fight. We appeal to a higher court. We find a way. But you are not going to an orphanage. I promise you that. You can't promise. You don't know. I know that I've already lost 7 years with you. I'm not losing any more. Clara studied his face, then nodded. Okay. They went inside where Evelyn had breakfast waiting. The cabin felt smaller now with just the three of them again, but also warmer, more settled. That afternoon they heard hoofbeats approaching. Cole grabbed his rifle out of habit, then recognized the rider, Thomas Pike from town, riding hard through the snow. Cole met him outside. Pike? What's wrong? The old man swung down from his horse, breathing hard. Message from town. Judge Blackwood's ruling came by telegraph this morning. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, Clara behind her. The world seemed to hold its breath. Pike pulled an envelope from inside his coat. I volunteered to bring it up rather than making you wait until the roads cleared completely. Cole took the envelope with shaking hands. It was official territorial stationery, sealed with wax. Thank you, he managed. Pike nodded, mounted his horse, and rode away without another word. Some news you didn't stick around to witness. Cole stood in the snow, holding the envelope that contained Clara's future. His hands trembled so badly he could barely break the seal. Let me, Evelyn said quietly. She took it from him and opened it carefully. Clara stood between them, her face pale but determined. Just tell me. I can take it. Evelyn unfolded the single sheet of paper and read. Her expression didn't change, which made it impossible to tell if the news was good or devastating. Finally, she looked up. He's approved it. Clara can stay. For a moment, nobody moved. The words seemed too big to process. Then Clara made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and threw herself at Cole with enough force to nearly knock him over. He caught her, lifting her off the ground, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and cried into his shoulder. You get to stay, he whispered into her hair. You get to stay. Evelyn read the rest of the letter, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He's granted permanent custody with the condition that Clara attend school during the academic term and that her living conditions be reviewed again in 6 months. But she's yours, Cole. She's officially yours. Cole was crying too now, holding his daughter and not caring who saw. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Clara said into his shoulder. You and Evelyn. We, Cole corrected. All of us together. They stood in the snow, a family that had been assembled from desperation and lies and second chances. A family that somehow, impossibly, had convinced a territorial judge they were real. And the strange thing was, Evelyn realized, they were real. Maybe not in the way they'd intended, maybe not in any conventional sense, but real nonetheless. That evening, they celebrated with the last of Porter's coffee and the good bread Clara and Evelyn had made. Clara talked more than she had since arriving, telling stories about her mother and Kansas City and asking endless questions about what school in Black Hollow Ridge would be like. Later, after Clara had gone to bed, Cole and Evelyn sat by the fire. 6 months, Cole said. That's how long until the next review. It's enough time to establish a pattern. Show that this is working. Is it working? Evelyn considered the question. I think it might be. Cole reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. The gesture was tentative, uncertain, asking permission rather than assuming it. Evelyn didn't pull away. Thank you, he said quietly, for all of this. For saying yes when you could have walked away. For helping me become someone Clara could depend on. For Cole, Evelyn squeezed his hand. Stop thanking me. We're in this together now. Are we? Because you still haven't said if you're staying after... I'm staying. The words came out firm, decisive. I don't know what that means long term. I don't know what we are to each other beyond co-parents and legal spouses, but I'm staying. Something in Cole's expression cracked open. Relief and hope and fear all tangled together. Okay. Okay. They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the promise of more snow. But inside the cabin, 3 people who'd been strangers 5 days ago were building something that looked surprisingly like a home. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what any of them had planned, but it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. The days following Blackwood's approval settled into a rhythm that felt both fragile and necessary. Morning chores performed in comfortable silence, Clara's questions filling the spaces between breakfast and lunch, evenings spent reading by firelight while wind rattled the shutters. But underneath the routine, something was shifting. The marriage that had started as a desperate arrangement was becoming something neither Cole nor Evelyn knew how to name, and the uncertainty of it hung between them like smoke. 2 weeks after the ruling, Clara woke with a fever. Evelyn noticed it first when the little girl didn't emerge from her room at her usual time. She found Clara curled in bed, face flushed and eyes glassy. My throat hurts, Clara whispered, and I'm cold. Evelyn pressed her hand to Clara's forehead and felt her stomach drop. The child was burning up. Cole, she called, keeping her voice calm despite the panic rising in her chest. He appeared in the doorway instantly, saw Clara's condition, and went pale. How bad? High fever, sore throat. Evelyn was already pulling extra blankets from the trunk. Could be influenza, could be worse. The word neither of them said hung in the air anyway. Scarlet fever, diphtheria. The diseases that killed frontier children with terrifying regularity, especially in winter when help was hours away and the cold made everything harder. I'll ride to town, Cole said. Get the doctor. In this weather, the trail's barely passable and there's more snow coming. Evelyn looked out the window at the gray sky pressing down. You'd never make it back before dark, and if the storm hits, then what do? We manage it here. Evelyn's voice was steadier than she felt. I nursed children through fever before. We keep her cool, force fluids, watch for danger signs. And if it gets worse, then you go for the doctor anyway, storm or not. Cole nodded tightly and disappeared. Evelyn heard him in the main room, building up the fire despite her instructions to keep Clara cool. He was acting on instinct. Cold child means warmth, and didn't know better. She followed him out. Cole, stop. She said she was cold. The fever makes her feel cold, but we can't let her overheat. Trust me on this. He stopped mid-motion, log in hand, looking lost. I don't know what to do. I do. So let me handle the medical part, and you handle keeping the cabin functional. Can you do that? He set down the log carefully. What do you need? Cold water from the creek, clean cloths. Willow bark if you have any. It helps with fever. And later broth. She needs to drink even if she doesn't want to. Cole grabbed buckets and headed outside. Evelyn returned to Clara's room and began the long work of fever management. Cool cloths on the forehead, small sips of water, constant monitoring. The little girl drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes lucid and sometimes mumbling about her mother in Kansas City and things that didn't make sense. Mama's singing, Clara whispered at one point. Do you hear her? No, sweetheart. That's just the wind. She's singing the song about the mockingbird. She wants me to come find her. Evelyn's chest tightened. Fever hallucinations were normal, but the content was heartbreaking. Your mama's not here, Clara, but I am, and your papa. We're both right here. Promise you won't leave? I promise. Cole returned with water and cloths and hovered in the doorway, useless and terrified. Evelyn sent him to make broth, gave him tasks to keep his hands busy, but she could see the fear eating at him. Every time Clara coughed or moaned, he flinched like he'd been struck. That night, the fever spiked higher. Claire's breathing turned shallow and rapid, and she couldn't keep water down. Evelyn worked through the dark hours with grim determination, changing cloths, monitoring temperature, watching for the red flush across the chest that would signal scarlet fever, or the membrane in the throat that meant diphtheria. Cole sat in the main room, head in his hands, listening to his daughter suffer and being completely powerless to stop it. Around 3 a.m, Evelyn emerged from Claire's room. Cole looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Well? The fever broke. She's sleeping naturally now. Evelyn sank into a chair, exhausted. I think it's just a bad cold, but we're not out of danger yet. The next 24 hours will tell. Cole's relief was visible. Then he looked at Evelyn properly and saw the exhaustion written across her face. When's the last time you slept? I don't know. Yesterday sometime. Go rest. I'll watch her. Cole, I can change a cloth and check her breathing. You've done the hard part. He stood and gently pulled her to her feet. Go sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes. Evelyn was too tired to argue. She climbed to the loft and collapsed onto the bed, asleep before she could remove her boots. She woke 4 hours later to find pale morning light filtering through the roof boards and the smell of something burning. She scrambled down the ladder to find Cole at the stove, staring in defeat at what might have once been oatmeal. I tried to make breakfast, he said. It went poorly. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. I can see that. Clara's still sleeping. Fever's down. She drank some water an hour ago without throwing up. Good. That's good. Evelyn took over the stove, salvaging what she could. You should rest now. Can't. Too worried. They worked side by side in the small kitchen space, Evelyn cooking, Cole cleaning his disaster. The domesticity of it struck them both simultaneously. This was what married people did. Shared burdens, took shifts, worked together through crisis. You were right, Cole said quietly, about knowing how to handle her. I would have made it worse. You would have figured it out. No, I would have panicked and ridden for town and probably died in a snowbank. He dried a bowl with more force than necessary. I'm useless when it comes to the things that actually matter. That's not true, isn't it? You're the one who knows how to talk to her, how to help when she's sick, how to make this place feel like a home instead of a survival station. His voice was rough with frustration. What do I contribute? Wood chopping? Hunting? Any frontier idiot can do that. Evelyn turned from the stove. You built her a room with carved bedposts before you even knew if she'd be allowed to stay. You cried at the train station rather than pretending to be strong. You ran into a blizzard to save a stranger. Clara's not afraid of you. Do you know how rare that is? Most children are terrified of men your size, but she climbs into your lap and asks for stories. That's different. It's exactly the same. You show up. You try. You let her see you fail and keep trying anyway. Evelyn stepped closer. That's what she needs, not perfection, just someone who doesn't give up. Cole met her eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or recognition. Two broken people trying to be whole enough for a child who needed them. How do you always know the right thing to say? He asked. I don't. I just say what I wish someone had said to me 3 years ago. Before either could respond to that, Clara's voice called weakly from her room. Papa? Evelyn? They both moved at once, nearly colliding in the doorway. Clara was sitting up, pale but lucid, the fever brightness gone from her eyes. I'm hungry, she announced, and thirsty, and I had the strangest dreams. Relief crashed through the cabin like a wave. Cole laughed, actual laughter mixed with something that might have been tears. You're hungry. That's the best thing I've heard in days. Can I have bread? The kind we made together? You can have anything you want. Clara considered this seriously. Then I want bread with butter and honey, and hot tea, and I want both of you to sit with me while I eat. So they did, crowded into the small room, watching Clara eat slowly and carefully while she told them about her fever dreams. She'd seen her mother, but it wasn't sad this time. Just her mama singing and telling her it was okay to be happy here. Do you think that was real? Clara asked. Or or just fever making things up? Does it matter? Evelyn said gently. If it gave you peace? Clara thought about this. No, I guess it doesn't. She finished eating and fell back asleep almost immediately, but it was natural sleep this time. Healing sleep. Cole and Evelyn retreated to the main room and sat in exhausted silence. Thank you, Cole said finally, for knowing what to do, for not panicking when I was falling apart. You didn't fall apart. You just let me take the lead for once. Still, I don't think I could have. He trailed off, looking at his hands. When Sarah was sick, I wasn't there. Didn't even know. And now Clara's here, and I keep thinking, what if I lose her too? What if I'm not enough to keep her safe? Cole. Evelyn waited until he looked at her. You can't control everything. Children get sick. Accidents happen. All you can do is show up and do your best. What if my best isn't good enough? Then we figure it out together. That's the whole point of this. She gestured between them. Whatever we are, partners, co-parents, friends, we don't have to do it alone. Cole nodded slowly, absorbing this. Then, what are we? Really? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to examine too closely. I don't know, Evelyn admitted. We're legally married, living together, raising a child. But we started from a lie, and I don't know how to build something real on that foundation. What if we started over? Cole's voice was tentative. Not the marriage part. That's done. But the getting to know each other part. Actually talk instead of just surviving side by side. Talk about what? Everything. Anything. He leaned forward. Tell me something real. Something that doesn't have to do with Clara or the judge or this arrangement, just something true about Evelyn Hart. Evelyn's first instinct was to deflect, to keep her walls intact, but Clara's fever had stripped something away, made her realize how tired she was of carrying everything alone. I wanted to be a writer, she said quietly. Before teaching, I wrote stories about adventurous women who solved mysteries and traveled the world, kept them in a notebook under my bed. My mother found them once and said respectable women didn't have such wild imaginations. What happened to the notebook? I burned it. Decided she was right, that I should be practical instead of dreaming. Evelyn's voice was flat. Became a teacher because it was safe and appropriate. And then I failed at that too. You didn't fail. You made a mistake. A mistake that cost a child her life. A mistake that's been costing you yours ever since. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. How long are you going to punish yourself? As long as it takes. For what? There's no magical amount of suffering that brings Rachel back or makes what happened okay. You're just choosing to stay miserable. The words stung because they were true. Evelyn looked away. Your turn. Tell me something real. Cole was quiet for a moment. The mind collapse, when I was trapped under that beam, I wasn't brave. I screamed for hours, begged anyone who could hear to just end it. The pain was so bad I wanted to die. But you didn't. No, because somewhere around hour 3, I heard the rescue crews digging, and I realized if I gave up, those men would dig through rock for nothing, so I held on out of stubbornness more than courage. He laughed bitterly, and then spent the next 7 years wishing I hadn't, wishing I'd died with the others instead of surviving to become this. This? Broken, scared, a coward who runs away from everyone who tries to care about him. You didn't run from Clara, because I didn't have time. If that letter had given me a week instead of a day, I probably would have convinced myself she was better off without me too. They sat with that honesty between them, two people who'd spent years believing they didn't deserve happiness, suddenly forced to reconsider because a 7-year-old girl needed them. We're a mess, like Evelyn said finally. Complete disaster, Cole agreed, and we're raising a child. Terrifying, isn't it? Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. Absolutely terrifying. Clara recovered slowly over the next few days, gaining strength and color until she was back to her usual self, asking endless questions and reading her mother's journal and practicing the wood carving Cole had started teaching her. The sickness had marked a shift, though. The crisis had forced Cole and Evelyn to rely on each other in ways they'd been avoiding, and the aftermath left them more comfortable in each other's presence. Small intimacies crept in. Cole's hand on Evelyn's shoulder when he passed behind her chair, Evelyn automatically pouring his coffee the way he liked it, both of them unconsciously moving in sync while preparing meals or cleaning up. Clara noticed, of course. Children always noticed. "Are you falling in love?" she asked one evening while Evelyn was braiding her hair for bed. Evelyn's hands froze. "What? You and Papa?" Mama's journal talks about falling in love, how people start finishing each other's sentences and touching without thinking about it. You do that now. We're just getting used to living together. That's what falling in love is, Clara said matter-of-factly. Getting used to someone until you can't imagine them not being there. Evelyn resumed braiding, unsure how to respond. It's complicated. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to admit something. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just started paying attention. The casual arrogance of it made Evelyn laugh. Fair point. That night, after Clara was asleep, Evelyn found Cole outside chopping wood by moonlight. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and his breath fogged with each exhale. "It's late for this," she observed. Couldn't sleep. He split another log with efficient violence. Kept thinking about the 6-month review, about Blackwood coming back and deciding we're not doing well enough. We're doing fine. Are we? Cole set down the axe. Clara's happy, that's clear, but Blackwood will want to see a functional marriage, not just adequate co-parenting. We are married, on paper, but we sleep in separate spaces. Barely touch unless Clara's watching. If Blackwood digs even slightly, he'll see we're not... Cole stopped, searching for words. Not what? Not actually together, not the way married people are supposed to be. Evelyn crossed her arms against the cold. What are you suggesting? I don't know. I'm just saying that if we want this to be convincing long-term, we might need to... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Need to what? Pretend better? Actually fall in love on schedule? Evelyn's voice came out sharper than intended. I agreed to help you keep Clara. I didn't agree to manufacture feelings I don't have. I'm not asking you to manufacture anything, Cole said quietly. I'm just pointing out that what we're doing now, this careful distance, might not be enough when Blackwood returns. Then what do you want from me? I want... He stopped, frustration clear on his face. I don't know. I don't know what I want or what I'm allowed to want. All I know is that somewhere in the last month, this stopped being an arrangement and started being something else. And I don't know what to do with that. The honesty in his voice cut through Evelyn's defenses. You're right, it has become something else. But I don't know what either. They stood in the snow, breath fogging between them, both afraid to name what was happening. Finally, Cole picked up the axe again. We should get some sleep. Morning comes early. Cole? It's fine, Evelyn. We don't have to solve this tonight. But as she walked back inside, Evelyn knew they'd have to solve it eventually. The 6-month review was looming, and Judge Blackwood would expect to see a real marriage. The question was whether they could build one before time ran out. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, Martha Henderson and 2 other women from town, arriving with baskets of food and poorly disguised curiosity. We heard Clara took ill, Martha announced, sweeping into the cabin like she owned it. Thought we'd check on the poor dear and bring provisions. Evelyn recognized the visit for what it was. Frontier gossip gathering disguised as charity. The women wanted to see how the mountain man's marriage was holding up, whether the quiet shop girl had civilized him, if the arrangement was real or exactly as suspicious as everyone assumed. Clara emerged from her room, still pale, but clearly recovering. The women descended on her with theatrical concern, asking invasive questions about her health and her adjustment to mountain life. And how are you settling in, dear? Martha asked with false sweetness. It must be quite different from Kansas City. It's fine, Claire said carefully. I like it here. But surely you miss having other children to play with. And proper schooling? Evelyn's teaching me. She used to be a real teacher. How convenient. Martha's tone suggested it was anything but. And your father? He's treating you well? Evelyn stepped forward before Clara could answer. Mrs. Henderson, if you have concerns about Clara's welfare, I'm sure Judge Blackwood would be happy to address them during his next review. The subtle threat landed. Martha's smile tightened. No concerns at all, dear, just neighborly interest. She turned to inspect the cabin with barely concealed judgment. You've certainly made improvements. It almost looks like a proper home. Almost? Cole's voice came from the doorway. He'd been outside but must have heard the visitors arrive. His size and sudden appearance made all three women take an involuntary step back. "Mr. Mercer." Martha recovered quickly. "We were just commenting on how much more livable the cabin appears with Mrs. Mercer's influence." "Good. She works hard." He moved to stand beside Evelyn in a gesture that was clearly protective. "Anything else you needed to inspect while you're here?" The women left shortly after, their mission partially accomplished. They'd confirmed the marriage existed, seen Clara healthy and reasonably content, and gathered enough details to fuel weeks of speculation in town. After they left, Clara looked at Cole and Evelyn with surprising understanding. "They think you're pretending." "Let them think whatever they want," Cole said, "but they'll tell other people. And then Judge Blackwood might hear." Clara's voice was matter-of-fact despite the fear underneath. "And he might decide I can't stay after all." Cole knelt beside her. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, I promise." "You can't promise that. You don't control what people think." She was right, and they all knew it. The 6-month review suddenly felt less like a formality and more like a genuine threat. If enough doubt circulated about the marriage's authenticity, Blackwood might decide Clara's placement wasn't stable after all. That evening, after Clara was in bed, Cole and Evelyn sat by the fire in heavy silence. "She's right," Evelyn said finally. "We can't control the gossip, but we can control what Blackwood sees when he comes back." "Which means what?" Evelyn took a breath, steeling herself. "It means we stop sleeping in separate spaces. It means we act like an actual married couple, not roommates raising a child together." Cole stared at her. "You said you didn't want to manufacture feelings. I don't. But I also don't want to lose Clara because we were too proud or scared to do what's necessary." She met his eyes. "We don't have to be in love. We just have to look like we could be." "And the loft?" "You take it. I'll sleep in the main room." At his expression, she added, "There's nowhere else unless you want to build another room, and that would take weeks we don't have." "Evelyn, it's practical, Cole, nothing more." But they both knew it was more than that. Sharing a living space was one thing. Sharing a bedroom, even if nothing happened, crossed a line they'd been carefully avoiding. "All right," Cole said finally. "If you're sure." "I'm not sure about anything, but I'm willing to try." That night, Evelyn lay in the rope bed that had been Cole's for 7 years, staring at the ceiling and listening to him move around in the loft above. The arrangement was awkward and artificial and nothing like what either of them wanted, but it was what Clara needed. And somehow, that made it bearable. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Cole slept in the loft, Evelyn in the main room. They shared morning coffee and evening meals. They taught Clara reading and arithmetic and wood carving. They navigated the strange intimacy of shared domestic space. Cole accidentally seeing Evelyn in her nightgown one morning. Evelyn walking in on Cole shaving at the basin. Small moments that married people wouldn't think twice about, but that made them both acutely aware of how much they were pretending. Except it didn't feel like pretending anymore. One afternoon, Clara asked Cole to tell her about her mother. Not the woman he'd loved and left, but the person she'd been before that. They sat on the porch while Cole carved and Clara listened. "She was fierce," Cole said, shaping wood with careful strokes. "Didn't take nonsense from anyone. When the mine foreman tried to short workers' pay, she marched into his office and read him the labor laws from memory until he backed down. Mama knew labor laws. Mama knew everything, read every book she could get her hands on. Wanted to be a lawyer, but women couldn't do that then." He smiled at the memory. "So she became the smartest person in camp anyway and made sure everyone knew it. Do I look like her?" "You have her eyes, her stubborn chin." Cole studied Clara's face. "But you've got some of me in there too. The nose. The way you frown when you're concentrating." Clara touched her nose self-consciously. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither. Just true." Inside, Evelyn listened to them through the open window and felt something shift in her chest. Cole talked about Sarah without the desperate guilt that had colored his earlier mentions. Just honest memory, good and bad, love and loss, without trying to rewrite history. He was healing. They all were. That night, a new storm rolled in. Worse than the one that had trapped William Porter weeks earlier. The wind hit with enough force to shake the cabin walls, and snow fell so thick it was impossible to see 5 feet beyond the windows. Clara woke screaming from another nightmare, and this time both Cole and Evelyn appeared in her doorway simultaneously. "The storm!" Clara gasped. "It sounds like something's trying to get in." "Just wind," Cole said gently. "The cabin's strong. It's weathered worse." "Will you stay, both of you?" They looked at each other across the small room, having the same silent conversation they'd been having for weeks. How much was too much? Where were the boundaries? What did Clara need versus what they were afraid to give? "Yes," Evelyn said finally. "We'll stay." They settled on either side of Clara's bed again, the little girl between them, and waited for her breathing to slow and deepen into sleep. But this time, when Clara dozed off, neither adult moved to leave. "Evelyn?" Cole's voice was quiet in the darkness. "Yeah?" "Earlier you said we just have to look like we could fall in love. For Blackwood." He paused. "What if we didn't have to pretend?" Evelyn's heart hammered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between burned breakfasts and fever watches and teaching Clara to carve wood, this stopped being an arrangement for me. And I think maybe it stopped being one for you too." The honesty hung between them like a confession. "Cole, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know, so we can stop pretending the pretending is necessary." Evelyn looked across Clara's sleeping form at the man she'd married in desperation 5 weeks ago. The mountain recluse who cried in public and built rooms with carved bedposts and ran into blizzards to save strangers. Who was learning to be a father despite having no idea what he was doing. Who looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. "You're right," she whispered. "It stopped being an arrangement for me, too." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. Cole reached across Clara and took Evelyn's hand, the same way he had the night Blackwood's ruling arrived. But this time there was no pretense, no performance for an invisible audience. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow built something worth keeping. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 3 people who'd been strangers weeks ago slept in the same small room. A family that nobody had planned but that existed anyway. Imperfect and complicated and absolutely real. The morning after their admission found them navigating new territory without a map. Cole made coffee while Evelyn cooked breakfast, and their hands brushed when he reached for a cup. Instead of the careful withdrawal that would have happened weeks ago, they let the touch linger, just a second, but it was enough to acknowledge that something fundamental had changed. Clara watched them with the shrewd observation of a child who'd learned to read adults for survival. She didn't say anything, just ate her eggs and smiled into her plate. "What?" Cole asked, catching her expression. "Nothing." Clara's voice was innocent. "Just thinking how Mama's journal says people glow differently when they stop fighting what they feel." "You're reading too much into things," Evelyn said, but her cheeks flushed. "Am I?" Clara stood and carried her plate to the basin. "Because you're both glowing." She disappeared into her room before either adult could respond, leaving them staring at each other across the table. "She's not wrong," Cole said finally. "No, she's not." They sat with that truth for a moment, the acknowledgement that whatever was happening between them was visible enough for a 7-year-old to notice. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like relief. The winter deepened as February arrived, with temperatures cold enough to freeze breath in midair and snow that never seemed to stop falling. The cabin became an island in a white ocean, and the 3 of them learned to exist in close quarters without driving each other mad. Clara practiced her letters and numbers with Evelyn in the mornings, then spent afternoons carving with Cole or reading her mother's journal. Evenings were for stories by the fire, sometimes from books, sometimes made up on the spot. One night Clara asked Cole to tell her about the mine collapse. Not the sanitized version, but the real story. Evelyn started to protest, but Cole held up a hand. She's old enough to hear it. So he told her about the warning signs the company ignored, the support beam that cracked, the sound of rock giving way, about the darkness and the screaming and the hours pinned under debris while men died around him, about giving up and then deciding to survive out of stubbornness. Clara listened without interrupting, her face serious. When he finished, she asked, "Were you scared?" "Terrified." "Do you still have nightmares?" "Sometimes." "Me too. About Mama." Clara picked at the hem of her nightgown. "Do the nightmares ever stop?" "I don't know, but they get quieter. and the good memories get louder. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing this. I'm glad you didn't die in the mine, even though it meant you weren't there for Mama, because if you died, I wouldn't have a papa now. Cole's voice went rough. I'm glad too. Later, after Clara was asleep, Cole and Evelyn sat by the dying fire. He'd moved down from the loft earlier that week, still sleeping separately, but in the same room now, separated only by the space between two beds positioned at opposite ends of the cabin. It was a small change that felt enormous. You were good with her tonight, Evelyn said. Honest, but not frightening. She deserves honesty, even when it's hard. Most parents would have sugar-coated it. I'm not most parents. Cole poked at the fire with an iron rod. I'm barely a parent at all, just figuring it out as I go. That's what all parents do, they just pretend they know better. Cole smiled at that. Is that what you did when you were teaching? Every single day. Stood in front of 30 children acting like I had all the answers when really I was terrified of failing them. Her voice went quiet. And then I did fail. The one who needed me most. Rachel. Evelyn nodded. They'd talked about it more in recent weeks. Small pieces of the story that she'd kept buried for 3 years. The little girl with blonde braids who'd tried to tell her teacher that something was wrong at home. The powerful family that everyone was afraid to cross. Evelyn's decision to stay silent rather than risk her position. She came to me 3 times, Evelyn said. 3 separate occasions where she tried to tell me. And I convinced myself I was misunderstanding, that I was seeing problems where none existed, that it wasn't my place to interfere in family matters. You were scared. I was a coward, and Rachel paid the price. Evelyn stared at the fire. The official story was influenza, but I saw the bruises. I knew better. Cole was quiet for a long moment. What would you do differently? If you could go back? I'd report it immediately. To the sheriff, the county judge, anyone who would listen. I'd risk my job, my reputation, everything. Because losing those things is survivable. What happened to Rachel wasn't. And coming here? Helping with Clara? Is that about making up for Rachel? Evelyn considered this. At first, maybe, but not anymore. Clara's not Rachel, and I'm not trying to save a ghost. I'm just trying to show up for a real little girl who needs real help. You're doing more than showing up. You're building a home, making us a family. We're making it together. Cole set down the fire iron and moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I never thought I'd have this. A second chance. Someone who saw all my failures and decided to stay anyway. I could say the same about you. He turned to look at her, and the firelight caught in his gray eyes. Evelyn, I know. I don't think you do. He took a breath. I'm in love with you. Not pretend love for the judge's benefit. Real love. The kind that makes me want to be better than I am. The words hung between them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. Evelyn's first instinct was to deflect, to protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting she felt the same. But she'd spent 3 years running from truth, and she was tired of running. I love you too, she said quietly. And it scares me to death. Why? Because everyone I've ever loved, I've either lost or failed. My mother who never understood me, Rachel who I couldn't save, and you. What if I'm not enough? What if I let you down the way I let everyone else down? Cole reached for her hand. You won't. You don't know that. You're right, I don't, but I know you've shown up every single day since you said yes to this arrangement. I know you fought for Clara when you had every reason to walk away. I know you turned this cabin into a home and me into something resembling a father. That's not someone who fails people. That's someone who fights for them. Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know how to do this. How to be loved without waiting for it to end. Then we figure it out together. Same way we figured out everything else. He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean against him, just resting her head on his shoulder while the fire burned down to embers. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, just 2 damaged people learning to be gentle with each other. And somehow that felt more real than any fairy tale. March arrived with the first hints of spring, temperatures climbing above freezing during the day, snow starting to melt and refreeze in patterns that made the mountains glitter. The trail down to Black Hollow Ridge became passable again, and Cole made his first trip to town in weeks. He returned with supplies and news. Judge Blackwood would be arriving in 2 weeks for the 6-month review. The announcement sent a jolt of anxiety through the cabin that had been mostly peaceful. 2 weeks, Clara said, face pale. That's not much time. We've been preparing for this, Evelyn reminded her. We're ready. But what if he asks hard questions? What if he finds something wrong? Cole knelt beside her chair. Then we answer honestly and trust that what we've built here speaks for itself. But people in town are still gossiping. Mrs. Henderson tells everyone you only married Evelyn because you had to. Let her talk. Blackwood will see the truth when he gets here. Clara didn't look convinced. And truthfully, neither did Evelyn. The 6-month review felt like a sword hanging over their heads, a reminder that their family only existed at the government's pleasure. That night, Evelyn found Cole outside chopping wood despite the late hour. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow-covered valley into something from a storybook. You're worried, she observed. Terrified. He split another log. What if we've been fooling ourselves? What if Blackwood sees right through us? Sees through us to what? We're married. We're raising Clara together. We love each other. She said it simply, stating facts. That's not fake. It started fake. So what? Plenty of marriages start for practical reasons and become real later. We're not unique in that. Cole set down the axe and turned to face her. What if he decides it's not enough? What if he says Clara needs a more stable situation, a bigger town, more opportunities? Then we fight, we appeal, we move to a bigger town if we have to. Evelyn stepped closer. But we don't lose her. I won't let that happen. How can you be so sure? Because I've already lost one child to my own cowardice. I'm not losing another. The fierceness in her voice seemed to steady him. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and they stood in the snow while moonlight painted the world silver. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For being brave enough for both of us. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. They cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, organized Clara's schoolwork to demonstrate educational progress, and practiced their story until it felt natural instead of rehearsed. Clara grew quieter as the review date approached, retreating into herself the way she had when she'd first arrived. The night before Blackwood was due, she woke screaming from a nightmare worse than any she'd had in weeks. Evelyn and Cole reached her room simultaneously to find Clara sobbing and hyperventilating, unable to catch her breath. He's taking me away, Clara gasped. The judge, he said I don't belong here and I have to go to Denver and I'll never see you again. It was just a dream, Evelyn said, gathering Clara into her arms. Just a dream, sweetheart. But what if it comes true? Cole sat on the other side of the bed. Then we figure something out. But I promise you, and I don't make promises lightly, I will not let you be sent away. Whatever I have to do, whatever it costs, you stay with us. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because the law gave me custody. And unless Blackwood can prove we're harming you, which we're not, he can't just take you away because he feels like it. Clara looked between them, desperate to believe. Really? Really? Evelyn confirmed. You're ours, Clara. Legally and in every other way that matters, and we fight for what's ours. The little girl's breathing slowly steadied. She fell back asleep between them, and this time when she did, both adults stayed in the small bed, cramped and uncomfortable but unwilling to leave her alone with her fears. Somewhere near dawn, Evelyn woke to find Cole watching her across Clara's sleeping form. What? She whispered. Just thinking how different everything is from 6 months ago. How I was completely alone and convinced I deserved to be. And now, he gestured at the three of them tangled together in the narrow bed. Now I have everything I never thought I could have. You built it. You and your carved bedposts and your terrible cooking and your willingness to cry in public. We built it. Yes, we did. Judge Blackwood arrived the next afternoon, earlier than expected, in the same official carriage that had brought him 6 months prior. This time, he wasn't alone. A clerk accompanied him, carrying documents and a ledger for recording observations. Clara gripped Evelyn's hand tightly as they waited on the porch, but her chin was up and her spine straight. Whatever fear she felt, she wasn't letting it show. Blackwood climbed down from the carriage and surveyed the cabin with assessing eyes. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, Clara, Judge Blackwood, Cole said, shaking his hand. Welcome back. Thank you. I trust you received notification of today's review? We did. Blackwood's gaze moved to Evelyn, then down to Clara. And how have you been, young lady? Thriving, I hope? Yes, sir. Clara's voice was steady, despite her white-knuckled grip on Evelyn's hand. I've been learning reading and arithmetic and wood carving, and I help with cooking and chores. Excellent. I'd like to see your schoolwork, if I may. They moved inside, and Clara produced her copybooks, pages of careful handwriting, arithmetic problems, drawings of plants and animals she'd observed. Blackwood examined them thoroughly, while his clerk made notes. Quite impressive, Blackwood said. You're progressing well beyond what I'd expect for your age. Evelyn's a good teacher, Clara said simply. Blackwood turned to Evelyn. And you've been managing this alongside household duties? Yes. It's not difficult when the student is eager to learn. The judge made more notes, then asked to tour the cabin. He examined Clara's room, the main living area, the food stores, the medical supplies. He asked questions about their daily routine, their plans for Clara's formal education, their financial situation. Finally, he asked to speak with Cole and Evelyn privately. Clara's face went pale, but she nodded and retreated to her room without argument. The judge waited until her door closed before speaking. There have been reports from town, he said carefully, suggestions that your marriage is one of convenience rather than genuine affection. Cole and Evelyn exchanged a glance. They'd prepared for this. It started that way, Cole admitted. I won't lie about that. I needed a wife to keep Clara, and Evelyn agreed to help. But things change, Evelyn interrupted. We've built a real partnership, a real marriage. Ask Clara if you don't believe us. I have no doubt Clara believes it. Children are remarkably good at seeing what they want to see. Blackwood's expression was unreadable. But I need to know if this arrangement is sustainable long-term or if it will collapse once the novelty wears off. This isn't novelty, Cole said, voice hard. This is work. Daily, exhausting work to build something that didn't exist before. And yes, we're still figuring it out, but we show up every day and try. Isn't that what matters? What matters is Clara's well-being and stability. Then look at her, Evelyn said. Really look. She was a ghost when she arrived, hollow and grieving and barely functioning. Now she laughs, she asks questions, she's learning to trust again. That didn't happen because Cole and I are faking affection. It happened because we built a home. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question they'd been dreading. Do you love each other? Yes, Cole said without hesitation. Yes, Evelyn echoed, and I know that's hard to believe given how this started, but it's true. Show me. What? Show me. The way married people who love each other do. It should have felt like a test, like performance. But when Cole reached for Evelyn's hand and pulled her close, when she leaned into him without thinking, when they looked at each other with the accumulated intimacy of 6 months spent learning to be gentle, it wasn't performance at all. It was just truth. Blackwood studied them for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. I believe you. The tension in the room evaporated. You do? Evelyn said. I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of families. Real ones, fake ones, everything in between, and I've learned that what makes a family isn't how it starts. It's whether the people involved are willing to do the hard work of showing up. He gestured around the cabin. You three are doing that work. It's visible in every corner of this home. So Clara can stay? Cole's voice was rough with hope and fear. Clara can stay. My official ruling will confirm permanent custody with no further reviews required. Blackwood pulled out papers from his satchel. However, I do have one recommendation. What's that? Enroll Clara in the Black Hollow Ridge School next term. She's bright, but she needs peers. Social development is as important as academic progress. We were already planning that, Evelyn said. She'll board with Mrs. Chen during the week and come home on weekends. Perfect. Blackwood signed the documents with a flourish. Then I believe my work here is done. He called Clara back into the room and handed her the signed papers. These are for you to keep. They say you belong here, with your father and Mrs. Mercer. No one can take that away from you now. Clara took the papers with trembling hands, read them carefully, then looked up with tears streaming down her face. Really? I get to stay forever? Forever, Blackwood confirmed. She launched herself at Cole first, wrapping her arms around him and sobbing into his chest. Then she turned and did the same to Evelyn. And finally, she stood between them and grabbed both their hands. "We're a real family now," she said. "Official and everything." "We've been a real family for a while," Cole said gently. "The papers just caught up." After Blackwood left, they stood on the porch watching his carriage disappear down the mountain trail. The sun was setting in shades of orange and gold, and the spring air smelled of pine and melting snow. "I can't believe it's over," Evelyn said. "It's not over. It's just beginning." Cole wrapped his arm around her waist. "We still have to figure out how to actually live together long term, how to navigate Clara's teenage years, how to make this marriage work without the pressure of performance hanging over us." "One disaster at a time," Evelyn said, leaning into him. Clara stood a little apart, looking out at the valley where Black Hollow Ridge sat in the distance. "Mama would have liked you," she said quietly. "Both of you." Cole's arm tightened around Evelyn. "I hope so." "She would have, because you're not trying to replace her, you're just trying to be here." Clara turned to face them. "That's what she would have wanted, for me to have people who show up." That night, they celebrated with the last of the special coffee beans Cole had been saving and a cake that only partially collapsed in the middle. Clara talked about what school might be like, asked 1,000 questions about Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and made plans for weekend visits home. Home. She said it without thinking, but the word landed like a benediction. Later, after Clara was asleep, Cole and Evelyn sat together on the rope bed that had been his for 7 years and was now theirs. They'd moved Evelyn's things down from the loft earlier that week, making the arrangement official before Blackwood's visit. Now the shared space felt less like performance and more like truth. "I was thinking," Cole said carefully, "about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this cabin is small, and Clara's growing, and if we're really doing this, building a life together, maybe we need more space, a bigger home. Maybe even closer to town so Clara doesn't have such a hard journey every weekend." Evelyn turned to look at him. "You'd leave the mountains?" "I'd leave anything for you two. The mountains were where I hid from life, but you brought life back to me. I don't need to hide anymore." "I love the mountains." "You do? They're harsh and beautiful and honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not." She smiled. "Kind of like you." Cole laughed. "I've been called many things. Honest wasn't usually one of them. You are now. With Clara. With me. With yourself." He pulled her closer, and she settled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, spring wind moved through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack. "Tell me about the stories you used to write," Cole said. "The ones your mother made you burn." "Why?" "Because I want to know all the parts of you, even the ones you think you have to hide." So Evelyn told him about adventurous women and unsolved mysteries, about dreams she'd buried and ambitions she'd convinced herself were foolish. And Cole listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions, building a picture of the person she'd been before guilt and fear had reshaped her. "You should write again," he said when she finished. "I wouldn't know where to start." "Start with Clara's story. The girl who lost her mother and found a family in the mountains, the people who learned to love each other despite everything. That's our story." "Exactly, and it's worth writing down." Evelyn thought about that, about turning their messy, complicated truth into something tangible, something Clara could read years from now and understand how they'd all saved each other. "Maybe I will," she said. They fell asleep that way, tangled together in the narrow bed, planning futures they never thought they'd have, building dreams on foundations that had started as desperate lies. The next morning, Clara woke them by bursting into the room with an announcement. "I figured out what I want to be when I grow up." Cole blinked awake, disoriented. "What?" "A judge, like Mr. Blackwood, so I can help other children find families like you found me." Evelyn smiled, still half asleep. "That's a wonderful goal. It means I'll have to study hard, really hard. Can we get more books?" "We'll get you all the books you need," Cole promised. Clara nodded seriously, satisfied, and headed to the kitchen to start breakfast. They heard her rattling pans and singing, something her mother had taught her. Cole and Evelyn lay in bed, listening to their daughter make a disaster of the morning meal, and neither moved to help. Some things were worth the mess. "We did it," Evelyn said quietly. "We did. Built a family from nothing. Not nothing, from desperation and lies and second chances." Cole turned to look at her. "But yes, we did it." Spring progressed into summer, and with it came changes. Clara started school in Black Hollow Ridge, staying with Mrs. Chen during the week, and returning to the cabin every Friday afternoon with stories about lessons and new friends and things she was learning. The separation was hard at first. Both Clara and her parents struggled with the distance. But they found their rhythm. Evelyn started writing in the evenings, filling notebooks with stories about frontier life and the people who survived it. Some were fiction, some were barely disguised truth. She didn't know if anyone would ever read them beyond Clara and Cole, but the act of writing itself was healing. Cole took on work guiding hunting parties through the mountains, using his knowledge of the terrain to earn steady money. He was still most comfortable in isolation, but he was learning to exist around other people without retreating entirely into himself. And slowly, impossibly, the cabin in the mountains became exactly what it had pretended to be from the start, a home. One evening in late summer, nearly 8 months after Clara's arrival, they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the valley in shades of purple and gold. Clara was curled between them, reading, while Cole whittled and Evelyn wrote in her notebook. "Papa?" Clara said without looking up from her book. "Yeah." "Do you think Mama knows I'm happy?" The question landed softly but carried weight. Cole set down his whittling and considered his answer carefully. "I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she's glad you found people who love you." "Do you still love her?" "I'll always love her. But that doesn't take anything away from what I feel for Evelyn. Hearts are strange that way. They have room for more than we think." Clara nodded, absorbing this. "I love Evelyn too. Not the same way I loved Mama, but just as much." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I love you too, sweetheart. I know. You show me every day." Clara went back to her book like she hadn't just broken and mended both adults' hearts with a single conversation. That night, after Clara was asleep, Cole found Evelyn standing at the window looking at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and she leaned back against him. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That 6 months ago I thought my life was over, that I'd spend the rest of my days being invisible and safe and numb. And now..." She turned in his arms to face him. "Now I have everything I convinced myself I didn't deserve. You deserve this. You deserve happiness and love and a family. So do you." "Took me long enough to figure that out." Evelyn reached up and touched his face, the scars and weathered skin and gray-streaked beard. "You know what the strangest part is?" "What?" "If you hadn't been desperate enough to propose to a stranger, if I hadn't been guilty enough to say yes, if Clara hadn't arrived when she did, none of this would exist. We built something beautiful from the worst circumstances imaginable. Maybe that's the only way beautiful things get built, out of necessity and desperation and people deciding to be brave when it matters." He kissed her then, not the careful, tentative kisses of early days, but the deep, certain kiss of two people who'd earned their right to love each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I want to do this right," Cole said. "I know we're already married, but I want to ask you properly, without the desperation or the time limit or the fear." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring he'd been working on for weeks, carved from antler and polished until it gleamed. Simple and rough and absolutely perfect. "Evelyn Hart Mercer, will you stay married to me? Not because of Clara or the judge or any other reason except that you want to?" Evelyn looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they'd built in this small cabin on the side of a mountain. Every practical instinct told her to protect herself, to keep her walls intact, to prepare for the inevitable moment when this all fell apart. But she'd spent 3 years being practical and safe, and it had nearly destroyed her. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay married to you, for all the impractical, unsafe, wonderful reasons." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for Het Duschenishur, which, of course, it had. They stood together in the small cabin that had become their world, and outside, the wind moved through the mountains that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to family. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be hard days ahead, disagreements and struggles and moments when they questioned everything. But they would face those days together. Two broken people who'd learned to be whole enough for the child who needed them, who'd built a family from desperation and lies and discovered that sometimes the best things start from the worst reasons. That courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about showing up even when you were terrified. That home wasn't a place, but the people who chose to build it with you, day after difficult day. Clara's voice called from her room. "Are you two done being romantic? Because I'm trying to sleep and you're being loud." Cole and Evelyn looked at each other and laughed. The kind of exhausted, joyful laughter that comes from surviving impossible things together. "We're done," Evelyn called back. "Good. Love you both." "Love you too," they said in unison. And in that moment, in a cabin on a mountainside in a territory that barely qualified as civilization, three people who'd been strangers months ago were exactly where they needed to be. Imperfect and messy and absolutely, undeniably real. The kind of family that nobody plans for but that survives anyway. Built on the foundation of second chances, honest mistakes, and the radical decision to keep showing up even when every instinct says to run. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. And sometimes staying is what saves you.